And so that's why, you know, I have to come out, you know, when I'm involved with someone in an intimate fashion with, you know, just a really powerful French accent, like, you know, like, je voudrais manger du pussy avec une
to release the baguette.
Yeah, you know, because, you know, who wants to listen to this when they're just near completion, you know, like, oh, are you enjoying that? Oh, how's that going? You know,
just makes me think of Pee-wit, you know.
Yeah, it does. And Mule, that's why I don't come during these Red Planet episodes.
Yeah, that's why you're not pee-wet. You're not pee-wet, obviously.
That's right.
Yeah, of course.
Just if our audience, I'm sure, wants to know, why are there a lack of orgasms on the Red Planet? And this is why. Everyone's
always asking this. I see it in the chat at least 5 times an episode.
We have to
so now you know.
It away. We hire mods, feed them gruel just for this.
That's right. That's right. It's Red Planet. That's right. It's happening. Oh my gosh. Welcome everybody watching, whether you're live, whether you're listening to us on a podcast. It's the show where we talk about all the base stuff, and we talk to base people, and there are base people in my immediate area known as my co-hosts. And I want to know, there's base people near you.
Yeah. Base
so I want to know.
In your area, they don't want to remarry. They just want to unionize.
It's true. And so with that in mind, let's speak to our lovely boy, Tim. Tim, what's the most based thing that you did
I didn't
this
even
week?
fill this out. I was busy writing other stuff.
Tim was busy writing the entire episode today, by the way.
So doing the entire episode for today.
I think that actually counts as like the most base thing you've done this week, actually.
It probably does.
If you're struggling, yeah.
Well,
I was thinking.
I was gonna say, it's such a shame you didn't pick me to go first, because I have a perfect answer for what you just said.
Oh, okay. Wow.
But that's okay. That's fine. That's fine.
The closest thing is probably I don't know. This is like, I mean, it's still my job, so it's like not like I, you know, did this of my own volition, but I did like a 10-year sobriety tat on a dude the other day.
Like, yeah,
that 10 years of being so. And I thought that was like, yeah, and like when I was doing it, I was like thinking a lot about that, about like how long 10 years is, and like, you know, like a lot of my friends that are like, you know, like sober and stuff, and like how like important those milestones are. And I was like, that's like 10 years is like so huge. That's like almost as long as I've been tattooing. And I think about like how much I've changed and stuff in that time, and it's like, wow. So yeah, so big ups to Mr. Greg, 10 years.
Big up Mr. Greg. That's so awesome, Tim.
Yeah. What about you, Mule?
So one of the base things I did this week was I finally finished my new video. That's out. It's on YouTube. It premiered today. Very excited about it. I've had a lot of good feedback from it so far. But it's really funny because I was going to say that like that's the only base thing that I've done this week, because it's got quite a based message. It's about, you know, basically talking about queer analysis of certain medias. I'm also going to be watching this on Kira's Twitch channel tomorrow with her to talk about that. So she's very excited. I'm very excited. You should be very excited.
Yeah. Twitch.tv/Kira Chat. If you're listening to this in the future, you can go find it on my YouTube channel, or on my Twitch channel, and maybe my YouTube channel. Maybe we'll put it on his YouTube channel. I don't know.
Like the queer themes in Berserk, right?
Yep, absolutely,
yes. Oh yeah, someone's put it in chat. B-Rat's put it in chat.
Brilliant. So yeah, there it is. And so I thought that this was the only base thing that I've done this week, because I've been so hyper focused on it. I've been really burnt out. Like, you know, you two all know what it's like when you just put so much effort into something, and then you're just like, I just need a rest. Like, I need to just like not do anything. So I've just been playing like a lot of Super Mario Galaxy. But also I found out that I did do some base this week. I actually spoke to a member in Manchester here, who's part of GMTU, and basically she's got like whole plethora of problems, and as per usual, you know, we do find that majorly people who come to us with disputes with their housing are racialized single mothers, and this was absolutely the case for this member. You know, they are just you know, obviously because of their marginalization, picked on, bullied a lot more than other people with more privilege, and so it was really good to be able to empower her with the knowledge that her landlord has basically broken the law at many points. There's something that you need as a landlord landlord in the UK that's called a gas safety certificate. So just a bit of know your right stuff here on the show today. If you're in the UK, you need a gas safety certificate, you know, as a landlord for your tenants. Otherwise, the property is not, it's not allowed to be used as a rented property. Like, that's just completely illegal, and because you're putting your tenant's life at danger, basically. Like, this is
just like making sure there's no like gas leaks, or like all the gas like fittings and stuff are up to standard and stuff, right? Yeah. Which is like, you know, like in an apartment building or something like that, if something could go catastrophically wrong, you know. So,
like that. That's the whole thing. So knowing that, like, imagine, I know, like Shafiq in the Twitch chat here is saying, letting a property without a gas safety certificate. Holy fuck, that's bad. It is really bad. So, you know, if that's something you've not had from your landlord, you know, that's a bit of leverage that you could use in a potential dispute with them. You know, just be like, listen, you're breaking the law, and that's what's going down. So yeah, had a meeting with a member about that yesterday, and she felt very good and empowered that, you know, we're going to move forward with her dispute. And so that was pretty good. But yeah, Kira, what have you done this week that is extra based?
Extra base, nothing extra base, but I am so. Since my base things that I do tend to be very self like oriented, because I'm a very selfish, self-oriented person.
Still important.
That being said, the base things that I've been doing is trying to make decisions that are healthy and good for me, and that are not. And you've been helping me with this. This is a base thing that you've done, Mule. You've been very helpful with this. For my own personal life, my own romantic life, trying to make healthy decisions, even if they're very difficult, that are good for me. And to that extent, I've been trying to like actually try to find base people near me, like you mentioned earlier. And so I already started like looking around, like dating stuff a little bit. And it's been really, first of all, it's been kind of traumatic because you interact with a lot of like shitty people. Like I've already been really like yelled at by a guy because I was like, hey, if we go somewhere, I want to make sure that place like has outdoor seating, because I'm like, I want to avoid COVID. And he just went off on me. And it was really jarring because like, this is a person that was like really nice and fine. And it's just like, that's the thing. Like if you're an asshole up front, that sucks. But it's a different kind of suck. It's a different kind of suck. It's a different kind of like traumatic when it's like someone that you're like, wow, you just like flip a switch. So navigating that's been kind of stressful as a communist, vegan, feminist, COVID believer. But it's also been really a challenge that I think is like probably a good thing for me to actually stop being so scared of interacting with the world around me, because of how insular that like our perspectives can make us feel, and to like reach out and see what's up. So I've already been like, you know, just trying that. I've already found out that like there's some normies that sure they're normies, but they seem pretty based and I think very pillable. And so I don't know, it's been kind of like a really scary but cool thing. For me, it's scary. This might not be a big deal for anybody else, by the way.
No, I think it's a huge deal, and I'm really proud of you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. I tend to like not have friends or do anything social at all. Like it's really not okay. I live inside your internet, and every once in a while I go outside and pick up groceries and I come right back inside the internet. Like I'm very not sociable. So this is like a big deal for me, and it's kind of like facing like a fear that I just didn't realize I had. And so it's been, I think that's pretty based. Right?
Extremely based. Yeah, I think, And
thank you, Mule, once again for being such a supportive friend and for giving me nice, friendly kicks in the butt. not mean ones, but like, listen, this is what's good for you.
Yeah, you got to have someone who tells you what's what. I pride myself on telling the truth. You know what I mean? I think if a lot more people did that, we'd live in a better world.
Teller. DJ Mule.
Yeah, that's right. Known truth teller, DJ Mule. Especially the thing that I said at the start of the show. That's definitely true. Right. Okay. So Thanks. So sorry, Kira, did it cut you off, or did you have anything else?
That's pretty much it. Cool. I'm single.
Should we just
so
make
I just want to put that out there into the world? I'm very single. I'm extremely single. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, Tim. Sure,
yeah. I'm sure Sophie's been up to like actual real life based stuff, but seeing as she's not here, what did Soph get up to this week? What are we imagining that she's doing right now? That's
she's probably tattooing her leg in another spot.
yeah,
some, like,
there's
like the picture of Lenin or something
going on. There's while also giving like some kind of like really empowering speech at a rally.
Doing an injection in one hand and then a self-tattoo
Lenin
on her thigh in the other.
Exactly. Double needled up. Just
It's like she's not even absent. She's
B-Rat saying Catboy Lenin tattoo. Let's fucking go. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what Soph is doing this week. But yeah.
We also have I don't know if you want to talk about this, Tim, or
I was going to say we started talking a couple weeks ago about, you know, starting to talk more about the based things that that all of you have been doing at home, and asking people to send in submissions of like, you know, what have you been up to as well. And it's been pretty cool. Yeah, getting to see some people, you know, some things that people have done. So we're doing them like kind of anonymously, right? We're not like attaching. Was that the deal?
Yeah, I think so. Unless people want their names to be announced.
Because sometimes it's kind of, you know, you don't really want to put it out there what you're doing or whatever. But so this one is an anonymous one saying, the base thing I did this week was anonymously set up a tiny food bank in my apartment complex. Our complex is fairly small, but I wanted to do something to help since food prices in the US are getting higher. I had a lot of food in my house that I knew I would simply never eat for one reason or another. So at 1 a.m., I set up an area in our communal laundry room with lots of shelf-stable foods and a note that says, apartment food bank, take what you need, leave what you don't. I don't intend to take credit for this in person, as I don't want to risk any potential trouble with my landlord. And they've attached a photo that of their little shelf set up. There's some tins, there's some Tupperware, there's like, I think I'm not sure what that is in the box, but I don't know, it's like a little carton of milk or something. Oh yeah, sweet. So yeah, lots of really good, useful stuff that would be pretty, I guess, useful for everyone. Which rules. It's really cool.
Super
awesome. Thank you so much for telling us about the base stuff you do. It really warms our heart. You know, this is the point of Red Planet. We want to inspire people to do stuff. So yeah, anything that you've got to tell us about, it's based at redplanet.show, is that right? Or is it redplanetshow.com? Redplanetshow.com. So based at redplanetshow.com.
You can also just on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, you can check it there. But so just include your name, pronouns, if you want to be anonymous or not. And and we might slide it in at the start of another episode.
Cool. That base thing reminds me of something I did before when I lived in the other city I used to live in, because I got really into gardening. And this is when I was like trying not to think of communism as like theory. And by the way, no, there's nothing wrong. And I don't think there's anything wrong. And I think there's actually a huge benefit and imperative to like learn about theory. But I was trying to step away from like a lot of the Twitter squabble, the nitpicking that I noticed, and try to be more like, okay, what the hell is the point?
Real life practice.
Right. What's the actual point? Like, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to treat this like I try to treat anything, which is try to just live according to my values. Like if I'm a communist, what does that look like? Instead of just waiting for the revolution to like start, what do I do today? And so because I was gardening, I started, I took these little like, I sprouted little seedlings of like edible plants, like kale and like romaine lettuce and like herbs and stuff. And I put them in these little biodegradable pots that you can just put right into like soil and it'll like, biodegrade. And then I labeled them all. And I put like a ton out. I know that B-Rat might have a picture actually to throw in the chat. Who knows? But Yeah, I put them out and I like put little labels and I put what they're good for. And I'm like, hey, anyone can take them. And people did. I was so excited because I kept peeking out and I'm like, oh, 5 are gone. Oh my God, I just put it out like an hour ago. And it was really exciting. And then I would walk through the neighborhood and I could see some of them in the windows. It was so cute. I loved it. And so I don't know, that made me, the base thing that one of our audience members did this week made me think of that. And it's such a good feeling when you can just do the thing, even if it's a teeny tiny little thing, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Like, and it's wild when you think about like if you've done that and you've just put them out and you see them in other people's windows and stuff. Like, imagine if everyone was doing some kind of small gesture like that, like the kind of communities that, you know, would pop up around that.
That's what I was that's what I was thinking. I'm like, it's not just the thing that was given. It's like the type of community that, like, if somebody receives one of those, what kind of effect does that have on them? Because we're like, even though I lived in the city, like people just like try not to, like, they avert eye contact. You shut your door. Like you don't actually interact with anyone, even though you're like stacked, you know, in a city. And this for me, as someone who doesn't know how to socialize either, I'm really bad at it. But this for me made me feel like at least I'm making a connection with people. Maybe they feel that, and it's not a connection that was based off of like a conflict, but it's out of just like a genuine, just giving with no intention of ever receiving anything. Yeah. And then B-Rad in the chat put the picture of the I don't know if we can pull it up or not. Let me see. Oh no, that's
that's amazing.
Those are the potato plants, but that's different. But in the background, see those little seedlings? I put little labels.
Yeah.
And for people to take. So I was so happy with it. Made me feel
good.
Good.
You should do this again if this is something that you could easily just do. Like, this rocks. Like,
well, I've since moved, so I have to get more gardening stuff, but I would totally love to do it again because it made me feel really good.
Yeah, I have some neighbors that have like a bunch of, like, they do a lot of gardening. They have like, they've built their own kind of big planter box things, and they do that kind of stuff. And like maybe like a month or so ago, they just like left a giant, like, you know, like a big basket thing, like a hamper full of all vegetables and stuff on my front door. And they were just like, we just have too many, you know, like, and it was like heaps. Like,
that's awesome.
Like, thank you for being a nice neighbor.
That's awesome. I love that.
But yeah, speaking of other based things that people are doing out in the world, before we get into the news, I guess this is news. The first thing I saw this morning when I woke up was John Leguizamo's, I'm not really great at pronouncing, but his statement of trans support on Twitter, which is extremely based, you know, like the climate around like trans stuff in the States at the moment. There's a lot of celebrities that are shying away from it. So it's awesome to see this like photo of him holding a drink, kind of cheesily smiling past the camera with writing over the top that he's probably done on his phone, which is like makes it more wholesome, saying that he's just, you know, all about trans rights and supporting the LGBTQ plus community, which yeah, it's great. Like, I just wanted to throw that in there because it's just like such a random little thing from John Leguizamo.
I think that is important though, Tim, because I think it's like when people are in these positions, I don't know like how often celebrities realize they're in a position of power, just because of, I guess, the circumstance and the bizarrety of being like a famous person. But like when you just take a stance that simply on social media, you can have like a massive effect on people. Yeah.
And it's like, it's wild because I'm thinking about like how many other celebrities have I seen making statements like that? Like not really that many, you know. And I mean, he's only had it up for like an hour, and there's already like just over an hour, and there's like already so many, you know, like comments on it, you know, from people. I love these ones. Thank you, Mr. Leguizamo. Are you single? But anyway, we should move on to the real hard hitting news of the.
Can I just say really quick? One of my favorite trans positive celebrity moments was Lady Gaga talking about how she was questioned by one of those interviewers, I forget who, about whether or not she has a penis, and she's just sitting there like chewing ice or something. And she's like, why do you even care? Like, no one care? None of my fans care. Why would that even matter? And the guy was like, the interview was like really offended, it seemed like, because he was like, this is supposed to be like a contentious issue, you're supposed to deny it, and she like all like flustered, but instead she's just chilling and just like being like, what is wrong with you, who cares?
Oh, is it actually Anderson Cooper, is that right?
I think it was. And then it's like, it's awesome because that turns it around on him. Like, you're the weirdo, like you're like, what are you
you're the weirdo
about,
asking about my genitals, what is wrong with you? And also, like, she never says trans rights or anything in it, but it's still in my mind like such a powerful, like the thing that sticks out the most about of her showing support for trans people, because she doesn't even have to like saying these slogans isn't powerful and stuff, but like just not even like just being like, what is wrong with you?
And not having to like think about it and make a really like a carefully considered statement or whatever like that. Just like obviously just reacting and being like, what? Like,
it's real. It's real. She was real for saying that, and that's the reality of the absurdity of, you know, anti-trans sentiments, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's the quote. Why the hell am I going to waste my time and give a press release about whether or not I have a penis? My fans don't care, and neither do I. Based.
Extremely based.
So, and what else is based? I feel like we've said that a million times this episode already. Based. So this is an update. We actually talked about this a couple weeks ago. Well, maybe even a month or two ago. This started off. But down here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, a bunch of strip club dancers got fired unceremoniously a little while back, and they've been since campaigning for increased protections, not just for their industry, but for all contractors in general. Extremely based. So this group, they've formed under the name Fired Up Stilettos, like FUS, and a lot of their stuff is like, you know, hashtag kick up a fuss and all this kind of stuff. They've been staging regular protests outside Parliament in Wellington, getting you know, the public to come along and join them and support. And they've had like, you know, like a whole bunch of like, there's a bunch of Greens MPs have joined them, and they've set up poles and they're like dancing in front of it. They've got microphones, sound system and everything. And it's been like probably one of the most based, with the best kind of like the most, I guess, the best messaging from a protest that I've seen for a long time. They all got fired together because basically their boss came in and was like, hey, here's a new contract I want you to sign. And they were like, well, okay, like, we're not going to sign that because the existing contracts are kind of shitty enough, and you're trying to take away even more rights that we have. And we're not even sure it's like the agreement that we're already on is legal, and you want us, you know, to have less, sort of thing. And so they were like, we're going to hold off on signing this for now. And then they went home that night or whatever, and then their boss fired them over Facebook, like in a group that all the other dancers, like everyone posted in like a workplace Facebook group. Basically, it was like named them all and was like, yeah, you guys are all fired or whatever. So they were like, okay, that's definitely kind of fucked up. So since then they've been doing this, and it was pretty good. A huge turnout, and a lot of like, it's not just the dancers, it's like their family members and, you know, like friends and all that kind of stuff around sport. But then there's been a lot of other people that are starting to come in, just who are just contractors or, you know, whatever, and they realize how it's like what they're talking about will affect them too, which has been part of their messaging since day one. Since they formed the group Fired Up Stilettos, they were like, we're not just going to be talking about just our rights, like that's obviously our prerogative, but we're going to be talking about like contractors' rights in general across, you know, New Zealand. So one stripper, Molly, who was one of the organizers, on just Sunday, because they've been doing this every week, spoke to the crowd and said, while the movement is about labor rights for strippers, it also goes deeper than that. This is about safety. It is about dignity. It is about race and gender. It is about fundamental human rights of those who work in the adult entertainment industry, she said. It's about contractors and the lack of protections that all contractors in our country suffer from. It's about stigma and discrimination and the pervasive impact those things have on the lives of people in this country. It's about breaking the cycle of abuse our managers have relied on to make profits. It is about recognizing that many industries in our country rely on the exploitation of women and gender minorities. And another stripper. I love all the names are like Molly and Lolly and stuff. But so another one, Lolly, who said she was part of the group fired from Calendar Girls in Wellington, said, it's hoped that this movement will help a number of sectors in New Zealand. We must look beyond our industry and find our fellow contractors in every sector, she told the crowd. Our hope is that if strippers manage to get legislative change that upholds the contractor's status, while ensuring venues treat us with dignity and professionalism, that perhaps other industries suffering from a lack of contractor protections will be able to make changes too. A third stripper, named Melody, who was also fired from Calendar Girls, dedicated her speech to MPs, or members of parliament. Sex workers are keepers of a menagerie of secrets. We value discretion, so we don't name names, but we know just how many members of this parliament and other government officials from across the political spectrum frequent our establishments, and I'm certain that you all have a hunch too, she said. So dear MPs, to know your colleagues are accessing our services and then to turn around and act as if this has nothing to do with you is both wildly hypocritical and deeply irresponsible.
Nice.
So yeah, which is like, that's a thing that has happened all over the world before, you know, like we've seen this in the States with you know, like Republican and Democrat as well, senators, like, you know, like voting against the sex, you know, like voting against the interests of sex workers, and then, you know, being exposed for being frequent patrons of like, you know, like brothels and sex workers and stuff. So yeah, so they got a petition on the New Zealand Parliament website. At the moment, it's got 3,200 and something signatures, and it's calling for an established right of adult entertainment workers to bargain collectively while maintaining independent contractor status. Outlaws all fines and bonds between employers and contractors, and establish a nationwide mandatory maximum of 20% that an employer can take from a contractor's profits. So this is a huge thing for them, where a lot of the time in a strip club, to go to work, you have to pay a bond, and then it's kind of like, you know, to if you do anything wrong or whatever, they can fine you, which can come out of your earnings for that night, or it can come out of the bond that you've already paid down and stuff. So there's, you know, instances that they've talked about, and that, you know, other people have brought up since this conversation has come up, where people are literally like going to work and dancing all night and coming home with like no money or even owing money, and just, you know, like because of this fine system, which is like totally illegal and stuff, but no one's ever really been able to push them on it, because, you know, like a lot of the time the dudes that run these clubs kind of just like pretty dodgy anyway. Like, you know, there's even like some of the biggest clubs in New Zealand are run by two brothers that are like dodgy as fuck, and are like super close friends with our former prime minister, and like, you know, just like all this kind of shady stuff. So like no one's really been able to push back, because a lot of the time it's like, you know, if you do push back or whatever, you can be fired, you can just be like not rostered on for any more shifts or whatever. So that's part of what they're saying here, where they want the right to be able to bargain collectively while still maintaining independent contractor status. So to be a contractor still, but still be able to kind of get together the way that a normal employee would or whatever, so that they actually do have some kind of power to kind of push back against the corrupt bosses and stuff. And the industry in general has, you know, widespread labor exploitation. I would say that like a lot of industries do, but but they want to make the point that it's not due to the adult nature of their work, but because of the lack of legal protections offered to workers who are not employees, and because we depend on a venue. We've experienced a culture of bullying, income theft, violations of contract law, and sometimes outright labor trafficking. We want nationwide intervention to stop these exploitative practices, the petition said. And that's the thing, right? Like, what a lot of sex workers need isn't you know, like they don't need the bosses kind of for, I mean, it's like for the most part, what they really need is just the venue, which is something that comes up a lot in their messaging, right? Like they need the club, like, or full service sex workers often need like a brothel or somewhere to work out of, and they don't need like a lot of the other stuff that these basically what you hear referred to a lot as like the pimp lobby, or like, you know, what is like effectively a pimp, like what do they bring into the table, you know, aside from the initial capital to start up a club or something like that. So there are clubs around that have moved to more of a co-op model. Apparently there is one in New Zealand that has shifted over quite successfully to do this, because they were basically just like, we want a venue, not a pimp, you know? So yeah. So that kind of middle management and stuff is just like, it's largely unnecessary, and from within a more worker like a worker controlled structure, you can, you know, like you can kind of democratically figure out how you're going to handle that yourself, whether you know, like you have someone as a manager that everyone kind of, you know, like reports to and does all that kind of stuff or whatever, or whether you share the duties between you. It's like, you know, there's plenty of ways to do that. And they definitely don't need a grubby man with, you know, lots of gold rings sitting in the back room. Like, you know, I don't know how to think of the stereotype, but like the dude that runs these clubs in particular is like that guy, you know. So yeah, so that's an update on what's happening with them. They have got, yeah, like I said, they've got some support from some like pretty, I would say, influential people within the Greens party, like the MP Jan Logie gave a speech at the event on Sunday, which is really cool. And I would be surprised if no other MPs got up behind them, because there's a couple others that I know that are like sympathetic to kind of you know, the plight of sex workers in New Zealand. So hopefully we'll see some movement on that, because I think it's going to benefit all contractors across all industries to have things like this in law.
Yes.
And not just, you know, like I think not just contractors and stuff as well. I think any time an industry like this, which is like considered kind of like a minority, you know, like a very small industry, anytime that they step up and make change from within, I think that can be a really influential thing here and abroad. So yeah. But moving on a little bit, what's happening over with the NHS, Mule?
Oh, it's the NHS, it's the UK, it's Nightmare Turf Island. Thank you, Tim. So the story that we're going to report on is part of something we've already reported on. It's the ongoing NHS crisis in the UK, but this is specifically talking about nursing union, the Royal College of Nurses, planning a mega strike in England later on this year. So England's biggest nursing union is to ballot its members on whether to join a, quote, make or break mega strike that would lead to mass action by nurses in every hospital trust in the country. If you've been listening to us report on this on Red Planet before, the massive nursing unions, Unison, have been organising strikes for nurses, and essentially they tried to negotiate a pay rise deal that the membership overwhelmingly did not want. And you know, you can learn more about whether your union is acting against the interests of its members on our episode on yellow unions, which was a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, this is yellow union behavior, you know, where unions are basically there like, right, we've done a bit of striking, what do you reckon to this offer? And you know, if there's any kind of attempt to circumvent the democratic process, then you got yourself a yellow union there, comrade. But luckily the RCN is listening to their members a bit more thoroughly, and they are talking legitimately about starting, as I previously said, one of the biggest strikes by nurses in this country. So Dr. Vivek Trivedi, co-chair of the BMA's Junior Doctors Committee, says coordinated action in the future is definitely something we could consider. Options could include action on the same dates as nurses or alternating dates. And this is another thing as well to remember, that junior doctors are also on strike as well at the moment. There's a lot of strike action going on in the UK for junior doctors because their pay rate has just significantly not been representative of inflation whatsoever. Someone did a really good sort of visual for people like me that don't really understand percentages and stuff like that. So a can of beans 10 years ago cost 40p. And a can of beans nowadays, we're talking about Heinz beans, baked beans, it cost £1.20. And I actually didn't know how much it had increased in price because I don't often buy Heinz baked beans because I'm just not that British, I guess. But it was a sort of really good, visual metaphor for the pay rise. It's like, so, they can afford, they could have afforded in 2010, like 24 cans of beans a month or like a week or something like that. But then in, modern days, they can only afford like, 8 or something like that. So yeah, it was a really good sort of visual thing that a lot of Brits, a lot of bruvs are going to enjoy. Do you know what I mean? They're going to enjoy looking at that. But yeah, in all seriousness, it is, such a horrific state of affairs with the NHS because, of course, we all know that the Tories are attempting privatization by stealth. And what that means is, not openly announcing that you're selling massive swathes of the NHS infrastructure. For example, call centers, that was, I think, one of the first things that that they started contracting out to other companies, private companies. And then, as things go on, private nurse agencies, private doctors agencies, so within the NHS might be something that's funded by the government, but, the people working within that are getting paid from the private sector, with subsidies from the government and stuff. So it is an attempt to privatize one of the most important institutions in the UK. We're talking free healthcare.
As an American, I can attest it's very important.
Right. This is just such an absurd thing in terms of like, what British people do not realize they have here. And most of British people's complaints about the NHS, trans healthcare aside, is that, this is just a result of the underfunding by the Tories. The trans healthcare, failings, and also the mental healthcare failings are also down to institutional, just oppression of both trans people, people who suffer, from mental health issues and stuff like that as well.
But they're exacerbated by a lack of funding because you can just be like, look, we only have $1. We're going to put it to not the minorities, not the people that we're already demonizing, and then you blame them for taking money.
This is exactly. It's like this big Ouroboros of, this is why we can't, fund trans healthcare. Well, this is also why. Also, this should make you, have no solidarity. It's really messed up. But yeah, so regardless, just coming back to this about the RCN strikes. So yeah, Dr. Vivek Trivedi said, like doctors, nurses have had cuts in pay in real terms. We are different professions, but we're basically fighting for the same thing. If it is able to be done in a way which maintains safety but increases pressure on the government, it's something we would be willing to consider. So that's some amazing solidarity from the BMA Junior Doctors Committee. Sir Julian Hartley, who's the chief executive of NHS providers, said in an interview on Sky News on Saturday that coordinated strike action would be completely unprecedented and uncharted territory. The RCN has said it is not planning at present to coordinate action with doctors, but I think that's a really good point to look at there in terms of how powerful this could be, just by a simple show of solidarity. And I think this is more of a testament to the rising class consciousness in Britain, especially among doctors, especially among people who basically work in the very infrastructure of what's important in this country, like healthcare and transport and stuff like that. So this is massive. Education too, as well, of course. We've been covering all this on Red Planet. The RCN's high-stakes strike action decision follows its announcement on Friday that its members had rejected 54% to 46% a government pay offer of a 5% rise this year and a cash payment for last year, despite the union's leadership recommending its approval. With feeling running high among many nurses that their own union set the bar too low in talks with ministers ministers, the RCN is now preparing a final concerted push to secure more for them. The union is warning ministers that if they do not reopen negotiations, they will face a potential nightmare summer, autumn, and winter of action by nurses, junior doctors, and potentially even hospital consultants who are threatening to ballot for strikes, all in the run-up to a likely 2024 general election. So yeah, this is another really important thing to consider as well, that, you know, the Tories, in terms of Boris Johnson, you know, when they were last elected in the last election in 2019, they ran on the fact that, you know, the Tories were saying that they would get the money that they've saved from Brexit and use that to fund our NHS. And obviously this is something that we're just not seeing reflected in doctors, nurses, consultants' salaries. And of course, you know, big parts of the NHS being sold off to private companies. So this is something that the Tories are going to desperately be trying to hide before the 2024 election. But of course, you know, if the unions keep up strong action, it could possibly force them to act. Whether that act is actually, you know, something that's accepted by the electorate, something that's accepted by, you know, people who would normally vote Tory or whatever, that remains to be seen. But, you know, we love strike action here anyway at Red Planet. So whatever happens, we're happy that this is happening. So yeah, where am I up to with this? The Prime Minister cannot run an NHS without nurses and doctors for the rest of the year. His last pay offer has failed the fairness test with nurses. The fairness test with nurses. I don't know what I just said there. And so they are expecting him to put another on the table. Our members do not feel valued, and until they do, they will remain a political problem for Rishi Sunak to address. A national strike by nurses would take the NHS crisis to a new level. The RCM will need 50% of its members to vote in the ballot, which will open next month, and at least 50% of these to vote yes to national action. Union sources says it will require 70,000 RCN NHS nurses to vote yes, 20,000 fewer than voted to reject the government pay offer. It is achievable, however, said a union source. The British Medical Association has urged the government to engage in talks over junior doctors' demands for pay restoration to 2008 levels. Ministers have claimed that this would amount to a 35% pay rise and called on junior doctors to cancel plans for any further strikes before any discussions could take place. It's funny, isn't it? It's like this is the back and forth negotiation we see when dual power is in its sort of early days, right? You know, so we have this dual power that is being cultivated by the unions in terms of workers' rights, specifically nurses and junior doctors' rights, you know, in this discussion particularly. And, you know, the government is quite clearly aware of how much power is in those organizations and how much they could disrupt services, which would lead people to, you know, be mad at the government, essentially. Be like, you know, come on, why aren't you just paying them more? Like, everybody wants the NHS to be paid more. There is no one in this country who is excited about the idea of privatization in the NHS. Everybody wants more and more people to be, you know, paying attention to this stuff. So it's like, you know, it's interesting that this is what they're trying to do. They're being like, no, don't strike. If you don't strike, then we'll talk about pay rise. We all know that's not going to happen. So, you know, this is why it's really important to show solidarity with these unions. But yeah, that is it on that particular story. And Kira, why don't you tell us about what's going on in Tunisia?
Sure. And just warning, there's a lot of words in this section that I'm probably going to mispronounce. So please feel free to correct me wherever. But yeah, I'm going to try my best. So a Tunisian footballer dies after setting himself on fire in protest. So Tunisian football player Nizar Izawi, 35 years old, suffered third-degree burns and was taken to the specialist burns hospital in Tunis, but doctors were unable to save his life. Izawi, former player for top fight side U.S. Monster, and a father of four, published a video on Facebook in which he said the reason for his protest was being falsely accused of terrorism in the village of Hafuz, Kirwan in the central. So it's a village of Hafuz in the city of Kirwan, which is in central Tunisia. News of his death sparked protests in the streets of Hafuz, and young demonstrators are hurling stones at police, who responded with tear gas. Izawi decided to make his protest against the police after officers accused him of terrorism when, and get this, he complained that he was unable to buy bananas for less than 10 dinars. which is like $3.30 a kilogram, double the price set by the government.
That's so wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he literally just made like a Facebook post or something, and they were like, because he's like, a person of note or whatever. They were like, you're inciting fucking, unrest and whatever bullshit.
Mm-hmm. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has said that Tunisia is experiencing its worst crisis in a generation, with inflation hovering around 11% and food becoming increasingly scarce. The Tunisian government has been negotiating with the IMF for a $1.9 billion loan agreement. The country's budget deficit was aggravated by COVID-19 pandemic and the fallout from Russia's war in Ukraine. Fuck the IMF, for the record. Sophie's not here, so what do we say about the IMF?
The IMF should be destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Izawi's protest recalled that of the street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi, who burned himself to death in December 17, 2010, sparking the Tunisian revolution that was the trigger for the Arab Spring uprisings. In a Facebook post shortly before his fatal action, Izawi said, quote, "For a dispute with someone selling bananas at 10 dinars, I get accused of terrorism at the police station. Terrorism for a complaint about bananas." He also said he had sentenced himself to, quote, "death by fire. I have no more energy. Let the police state know that the sentence will be executed today," he wrote.
Yeah, and so I
think I have no idea. This just
so hectic, right? Like
I think this is a really good example of how, in terms of people bearing the biggest brunt of the material conditions that capitalism just makes worse and worse and worse. We're talking global neoliberalism and imperialist hegemony. The states who are empowered, by the very notion that states are legitimate, will just basically just keep trying to prevent people from complaining about anything, to the point where it gets so extreme that people are so exhausted, tired, done with it, that they feel like something like this is the only option. And huge, massive respect to Izawi, and obviously like condolences to his family as well, because I think and huge solidarity to the people of Tunisia, because this is the very, very, it's one of the best examples, unfortunate, horrific examples of what neoliberalism is doing to people, like in the imperial periphery, right?
And so even so he complained about the bananas costing 10 dinars, but the government said that, the government has said, like, this is how much they should cost, and it was half that. And it's like wild that they, you would think that a just government would be like, wow, this guy's right. Like, we've kind of, we've said that this is how much bananas should cost, but, they're obviously not. But We've covered what's happening over there before, and like the huge cost of living crisis and stuff. And I think that one thing that really sticks out to me with this one particularly is that normally when you see people performing acts like this in protest, whether it's self-immolation or like something else that is like quite self
hunger strike stuff.
Something like that. It's usually someone who is like poor and doesn't really have much else to do. Like a lot of the time with especially with self-immolation and stuff, or like something that is like an act of suicide basically. It's often someone that it feels like they don't really have any recourse or whatever, and so to see it not coming from just like a small shop owner or a bus driver or something like that, like a professional football player that is like extremely well known, to be to doing this, really shows how, he basically felt like this was, like the only recourse, like this is the best way that he could kind of like make this statement.
I think that also highlights the disparity between like imperial core nations, imperial periphery nations too. Like Tunisia's, one of their top footballers, resorted to something, like this because, so underpaid and not actually like able to survive. That's like the flip side of that in the imperial core is Marcus Rashford, who is able to use his platform to accurately like detail how the government is starving kids in the UK. So it's like that's the privilege that footballers have in this country versus, you know what I mean, in terms of like the way that things are in imperial periphery companies, which countries, they're the same thing anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, essentially it's obviously important to remember as well that the reason imperial peripheries are forced to act this way is because of the IMF, as was detailed by Kira in that story. Because it's just, it's absolute horrific imperialist.
Yeah. I feel like we speak about this every week, but just for anyone wondering the whole deal, because it says here like, oh yeah, they're looking for a loan with the IMF. That sounds good, like a way to get some money or whatever. But the whole deal is that a lot of people refer to this as like neocolonialism. There's there's a lot of writing on it, like Kwame Nkrumah. I don't know. It's been like probably a decade since I read it, but he wrote a lot about this, and so the IMF will often do things like they'll give a loan to a country, but the conditions that they set to pay back the loan are pretty hard. So it's like, the repayments will be pretty steep, but also it's like, to get this loan, we need you to do the following things. And it's obviously often a way for the IMF, which is like largely kind of like in line with the global hegemony set by like America and the UK and all this kind of stuff. It's beneficial for them to do things, I guess, to set conditions in line with the global neoliberal project, I would say, so a lot of the time it's forcing austerity on their people, which makes them even more kind of, I guess, like financially exploitable, all kinds of stuff. Basically like there's been countries before that have basically been like, okay, cool, to do this, you have to, alter the laws in your country in a certain way that makes cheap production for the imperial core possible in your country, sort of thing. So like massive economic overhauls and stuff, which not just for the terms of like the loan or anything like that, but definitely change their place, like removing production of things for their own country to production for things in the imperial periphery to the imperial core, stuff like that. So yeah, it's
I always
really difficult.
I always imagine like a sort of bureaucratic sort of like scene where a paper, an application for like funding from the IMF like goes from an imperial company, an imperial country, and imperial periphery country, and goes to application for the IMF, and it comes back with a big red stamp letter saying "too socialist." Do you know what I mean? Like that's basically what happens a lot of the time. It's like, oh, you've got too many workers' protections. You've got too many, guarantees for people.
Yeah, totally. And it's the kind of thing that like they can take one of these loans and they can do some stuff, and it will increase the quality of life for some people, but then drastically decrease the quality of life for a lot of people as well. So it's like when you're already at kind of like the starvation point, it can be really bad. And it's one of those things where it's like it's not a way for anyone, it's not a way for a nation to kind of get out of the hole. It's just kind of like temporarily kind of like delaying the inevitable, but putting more power in the hands of other people to kind of dictate what goes on instead of the hands of the actual working class people of the country, which like I would say is like working class uprisings are the real way to get out of that kind of situation, I would say. But obviously with a good plan and everything like that. Like the problem is that a lot of these times there are, you know, you do get reactionary groups kind of, you know, staging coups and things like that, like military juntas that can often, yeah, like generally sway towards reactionary politics. But yeah, hopefully something good happens in Tunisia, because yeah, it's been pretty hard for them lately. Absolutely. So yeah, we should probably move on. We've got one more news article, and then we'll actually start talking about the topic of the day. So the last one here is I can't pronounce it.
How do you pronounce it, Mule?
Yeah, Mule.
Sorry,
the French president,
Emmanuel
Macron.
I hope that's not like. Does that count as racism when you like put on like, fake French accent?
The French had colonies. The you know.
Yeah. No, it's
fucking.
Just like it's not racism when I go cheeky little stream.
No, that's not racism. Like, yeah, you absolutely like racism.
That's actually what's
people is fine.
So racism is when you like, you know, you say bad things about you know, like a racialized group, but you know, like the idea of it being like you know, like you can't be racist against white people because it's like, you know, like they have no race. They set the hegemony sort of thing, whatever, like that. Yeah. It's like, yeah, you know, and it's like, and white is like more like a concept than like a, you know, a social category than, you know, like a set of indicators or whatever. So what is the name for racism? Like when you say
just
racism
against like a country
white
person.
People, but as like a good thing, you know, because racism implies bad, but like when we're talking about the good racism against British people,
well, exactly, it's not actually racism, is it? It's qualified criticism. Yeah. Actually, just like it's
it's just the truth. So yeah, it's anti-imperialism when you do it.
But so we can make these jokes because we have British people on Red Planet.
I've given them all the bro pass.
I have British friends. I can say this. Mule's my British friend. He's present right now.
As a mixed race individual, I'm allowed. I've got many passes, so I can talk shit.
Exactly. So yeah, Tim, tell us.
Privilege.
Anyway,
tell us about what Macron's been up to.
What is Macron been up to? French President Emmanuel Macron has signed his controversial pension reform into law. So we've been covering this for months now, you know, keep updating. Like people have been rioting in the streets because they've wanted to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. And there's a bunch of other stuff as well, including like determining how many years you have to have been working to be able to qualify for a pension as well.
Right.
So they signed them in even after, like, you've probably all seen the videos and photos of the rioting in the streets, you know, like skirmishes against the police and everything like that. And they just did it anyway. And Macron basically just signed it in. It was just like, you know, no, you know, like we've already committed. This is what we're going to do. So the alterations became law on Saturday after the text was published overnight in France's official journal. This followed the approval on Friday by France's highest constitutional court of the essence of the legislation, including the banner change of raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. Opponents of the changes say they penalize women and unskilled workers who started their careers early and undercut the right to a long retirement. Unions called for mass Labor Day protests on May the 1st, and some violent demonstrations erupted in several cities overnight after the verdict was announced. The 9-member Constitutional Council ruled in favor of key provisions of the reform, including raising the retirement age to 64 and extending the years of work required for a full pension, saying the legislation was in accordance with French law. So it's interesting to me that this is like, a 9-member court versus like, I think they said like 2 out of 3 French citizens supported the protesters, you know, so 2/3 of the public were against this
So that's about 40 million people, basically.
Yeah. It's wild. So yeah, you know, but then 9 people who themselves, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they will not require they will not they won't rely on the money from a pension,
Yeah,
even
they
if,
got a
you know, when
private
they do
pension.
retire. Yeah, exactly. You know, like so 9 probably already quite rich people don't who aren't going to be affected by this have made that decision for the entirety of France. Um, 6 minor proposals were rejected, including forcing large companies to publish how many over 55s they employ, and the creation of a special contract for older workers. So yeah, so 6 different like little kind of things, people being like, well, okay, what if we do this as well? What if we do this? You know, like to kind of give some kind of protections for older workers. So yeah. So, the president's approval ratings are near their lowest levels ever, and many voters have been outraged by his decision to ram the pensions law through parliament without a vote, using a legal but controversial mechanism denounced by opponents as anti-democratic. So, yeah, so that's the thing, right? It's like there was some kind of like legal, I guess, like, I don't know, like a loophole or whatever that allowed them to put this through without actually having a vote on it. And you know, like people were like, oh well, it's not really, you know, it's not fair for you to do this where it's going to affect everybody without doing a proper vote, like, you know, some kind of referendum or whatever like that. And they were like, well, no, we're going to use this little special mechanism anyway. So yeah, polls consistently show that 2 out of 3 French people are against working a further 2 years. Macron has called the change necessary to avoid annual pension deficits forecast to hit 13.5 billion by 2030, according to government figures. So that's 13.5 billion euros. And yes, so that's the thing, right? Like they've decided that this is the only way to avoid the pension deficit. But well, that's the way that they say. But other people have submitted alternative plans, which you know have been things like, you know, like taxing corporate profits and things like that. You know, like all the people, like the corporations that are in the upper tier that benefit from all the people working should help contribute to, you know, their retirement, because, you know, people have spent their entire lives, you know, slaving away working for them. But yeah, even the Prime Minister, Elizabeth Bourne, tweeted after the verdict that there are no winners or losers, but the left-wing Liberation Daily said its headline above a picture of a protest, not defeated, opponents of the reform are not going to disarm. So yeah, so the Liberation Daily, obviously, you know, like saying the battle's not over, whereas the established kind of like, you know, the establishment politicians are going like, oh well, you know, no winners or losers here. We're all, you know, we're all French at the end of the day, or whatever it is. Whereas I don't think the vibe on the street is the same. So bikes, e-scooters, and garbage were set on fire in the capital overnight, while protests rallying hundreds erupted in other cities, including Marseille and Toulouse, and the western city of Rennes. Protesters set fire to the entrance of a police station and a conference center. Paris police said 112 people had been arrested as of 10:30 p.m. local time. An estimated 380,000 people took to the streets nationwide on Thursday, and the latest day of union-led action, according to the Interior Ministry, a small fraction of the nearly 1.3 million who demonstrated at the height of the protests in March. So we'll see how that goes, though, because so usually when, you know, a big protest kicks off, there's like a huge swell initially, and then it dies off a little bit over time as, you know, the actions are sustained. But I think with this actually going into law now and them planning in a couple of weeks this May Day, this 1st of May protest, I think, you know, we might see like a renewed vigor, maybe even more people than the initial protests coming out. So yeah, speaking of that, the unions issued a joint statement urging Macron not to sign the legislation into law, saying the issue was not finished. The General Secretary of the CGT union, Sophie Binet, called for a popular and historic tidal wave of people on the streets to oppose the reforms on 1st of May. So yeah.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, pretty huge bummer for them to just slam it through anyway. but hopefully this gets people out on the streets. I know that, so the CGT union, they're the big based French union that we've talked about a couple times, who they have been around for a long time. They used to have membership in the millions, but they've, steadily kind of like tapered off over the years. They were formed initially when all the trade unionists, communists, and anarchists in France all got together, and they were like, let's make one big, union together to actually challenge the status quo. And they were super successful. They've been around forever. But apparently, since this has kicked off, their membership is starting to go back up. So it would be great to see them kind of, back on top.
Smashing.
And
they,
like.
Oh, sorry, Tim, go on.
I was going to say, and this something like this usually can be a really good rallying point for that. Like, as much as it sucks, I think that it is kind of like moments like these that really kind of galvanize a lot of people into becoming radicalized in the good way. So yeah.
Yeah, I've there's been a lot of underhanded tactics from the cops as well. 1312 is a fantastic, interesting number, and it would be funny if everybody just wrote that number in the Twitch and YouTube chats, just for no reason whatsoever. But I think that it's important to point out that, like, the state is trying all kinds of tactics to suppress these protests. I've seen undercover cops arrest protesters on Popular Front, which is a social media account that we talk about quite a lot on the show. Popular Front, pretty good at covering stuff all over the world in terms of revolutionary based activities and stuff. Just sort of these kind of like escalations of police violence as well. We've seen riot police brutalize protesters, and we do see like more intense protest tactics from the French, but again, they are not directed towards people, whereas the state violence is. So that's something that you really must remember when looking at this stuff and looking at the way that the state fights back against this stuff.
It is really interesting as well that so they're raising it from 62 to 64. Obviously that seems like only 2 years, but that's a huge amount of time that you're still in the workforce, you're still paying taxes, you're still contributing to like your pension fund, all that kind of stuff, making money for companies and stuff. So that's like it is quite a lot of time. It's a lot of time to be working on your feet and stuff. But also, like, the French pension age is lower than like most other places around anyway, so it's kind of like wild, because it's like seeing them turn out for this and then looking at it in New Zealand, it's like 65. Like, it's probably similar over there.
I think it's 60. I can't remember. We cover this. Go and listen to a past episode if you want to know what it is in the UK. I've forgotten. I think it's about 67. They want to increase it to 68 or something. Meanwhile, the Americans are like, what's a pension? I don't think I'll survive that long because of healthcare, So very, very sort of privileged over here in Europe regarding that.
So
I've been literally like I said earlier, like trying to go out in the dating world and stuff and talking to normies, and it's not unfortunately in America, and it's not an uncommon thing that I found, that like a lot of people in my age group are like, yeah, I just hope I die early and I don't have to like, like it's like they're like people that are existing, and they're out there trying to date, and they're clearly like engaging with life, but they really just have they just are like, yeah, I just hope I just don't have to exist like that long, because
fucked.
Even normies can tell that like what they're already struggling. Like, people in my age group don't have houses. Like, we're already getting squeezed out of being able to afford anything, to choose between food or rent or so on and so forth. And
it's like, this is like, it's kind of like that thing where it's like people are starting to wake up to that, where it's like, they can fall into that kind of like the doomerism, or it's like, or you can get out there and set fire to some cop cars, you know. So I think that like it's our like kind of responsibility,
which we would never
like,
advocate for the record here at Red Planet.
Never,
like,
ever break the law.
We notice it when it happens. Some people do that to cop cars, and it breaks our heart to see it. But we are always going to be here to tell you when it happens.
Exactly.
But so yeah, I think it's like as you know, like as people that are like, you know, politically aware, politically conscious, or whatever like that, you know, it does it kind of becomes a responsibility to, you know, like when you hear your friends talking about, you know, stuff like that, to be like, hey, well, you know, like if they're in an industry that is unionized, be like, hey, well, you know, maybe you should look into this, you know, joining a union or whatever like that. Or if they're not in an industry that's not unionized, maybe there's something that they can do there, and just try and kind of you know, get them red pilled on that there could be a future, but it is something that we really have to kind of like get out there and build with our hands, literally, you know. So yeah, so it can be hard. Like, I definitely know a lot of people, especially people that, you know, are disabled, who have a lot of fears about how they're gonna fare, sort of, you know, like in the years, I guess, like, you know, the last few decades of their life. And it's, yeah, and it is kind of scary to think about, but yeah, I think it's like, it's a thing. It's part of the prerogative for people to kind of like, I guess, like, you know, like a lot of people say that thing of like, oh, it's like, you know, not my job to educate people or whatever like that. Whereas I feel like for a lot of stuff like this, it absolutely, like,
it kind of
is our job.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know,
it kind of
like,
is.
It is, you know, like when you see people going like, oh man, like, you know, there's no houses, we can't do this, blah, 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 like that. And it's kind of like this really defeated kind of attitude or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas like, I think that, you know, we can go like, oh, well, hey, you know, in this country, they're doing this, you know, in France, they're doing this, in China, they did this or whatever, you know, and just kind of, you know, like help people see that a better world is possible. And yeah, I think you do need to kind of like temper your, I guess, temper the way that you're explaining it, because especially if they're kind of normie or whatever, like you don't want to just be like, well, in China, this man called Chairman Mao
he did some crazy stuff. Oh wow.
Yeah, this is something I'm working on, because like I need to figure out how to do it like you do it, Tim, because Tim talks to a lot of people as a tattoo artist that are like normies, or even a little maybe even a little more radicalized the wrong direction, and manages I saw that, Mule.
No,
I saw that.
Well, look, the thing is about Tim's profession is that, you know, the reason he gets to get these education moments in is because of the implication, isn't it? Because if you're strapped into a chair with a man with an incredibly fast needle, you know.
I don't actually think there is that. Like, I don't think there is that, like, kind of like, I guess, like, threat implicit to it.
There is. There's an implicit threat.
He's Tim is coded as like a cool.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's more of the thing. Like, it's like people are more inclined to be like, oh, you know, like there's this, you know, like especially with dudes who are like, you know, like trying to be like, you know, macho dude or whatever, like Joe Rogan dudes, you know, when they come into the shop and stuff, and they think like, oh, this is a guy that has like tattoos on his head. So like he's not like, you know, he's not a wokeist and pronouns.
He's not soy boy.
Yeah. There is like that's the, I think, obviously I was joking before, so of course there's no implication, like, you know, a tattoo gun is not going to be able to hurt anybody beyond what it actually does hurt. In terms of like you know, having that privilege as a masculine person, like I find that quite often as well. Like I have literally had my stepdad say to me that I'm not one of those kinds of lefties before. And I do just think that is because I'm a man that's quite masculine. Like I've got a beard, I've got a bald head, you know what I mean? I work out and shit. So I think we should be using these privileges that we have to educate people, because unfortunately, you know, the way that these power structures hold people up is, hold the system up, you know, they will only listen to masculine people or men in general. Yeah.
And it is kind of funny that you know, like there is that kind of you know, like I guess like stereotype of, you know, like the um I guess like the lefty feminist type or whatever like that. And then when you look at like the history of like, you know, like communists, like yeah, like Thomas Sankara, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, all these like, people like that. And it's just kind of like, man, like a lot of these guys had what the, you know, like what the alpha male dudes wish they had, you know, like like the alpha based Chad that doesn't believe in the concept of the alpha based Chad. But anyway, this is getting a little bit.
Yeah, we're off the rails.
Yeah.
So we don't have guests today, chat. So we're really taking liberties here to just sit back and to really just have a relaxing Red Planet episode. But should we proceed?
Yep.
Shall we?
Yeah, we decided today that because we don't have a guest, so we were just like, let's just do something more like a general kind of conversation, education kind of episode. And so this week we're going to talk about boycotts. We're going to start by talking about like what it is, what they are. Go over some examples from history of successful boycotts, and I guess even go into like what is happening these days with the way that boycotts have changed over the years and with social media and stuff like that. So
I think it's so funny, the origin of what boycott means, because it only was up until like so embarrassingly recently. Like we discovered this together on stream like 2 months ago, where we Googled boycott. I was like, it's not just like a word that's part of the English language. It's named after Captain Boycott. His name is Captain Boycott.
And it was like, so we'll explain it all in a second, but I love that it was it's kind of like this guy that they were kind of protesting, and they took his name and they put him on it.
It's just a guy, just a little
legacy
guy
to be like the eternally like unliked guy. That's when we say the word boycott, everyone's like, oh yeah, we hate that guy, that's why we're all getting together to do this.
Imagine being his descendant, the boycott, you know, you'd be like, oh yeah.
That is the will
Let's
be
have a
wrote
mule.
There. Yeah.
So it's the opposite of boycotts. We all come together and give hugs.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what I want to be remembered for.
So anyway, let's get into this. I've written some notes here, and we'll just go through each little bit, and we'll, you know, like have a little talk when, you know, when it's pertinent. So the term boycott originates from the name of an Irish land agent, Captain Charles Boycott, who was hired by a British landlord in Ireland in the late 1800s. So this is, you know, like obviously Ireland famously kind of under the boot of England and always pushing back sort of thing. So yeah, British landlord, owned a bunch of farms and stuff in Ireland. And so Captain Boycott was hired to collect the rent from all these farmers that were renting out the land. So Captain Boycott was responsible for collecting rent from Irish farmers who were struggling due to a severe crop failure. So yeah, the crops failed. They were struggling to get the harvest to sell, to make the money to rent. And so when they were unable to pay the rents, they organized a non-violent protest against Boycott by refusing to work for him, speak to him, or do any business with him. So basically just ice him out. So, you know, he'd come around and then just, you know, keep whistling and walk right past. And so this protest against Captain Boycott became known as a boycott. And the term has since been used to describe a collective and voluntary refusal to engage in commercial or social relations with a person, group, or organization as a form of protest or coercion. So yeah, so it was amazing. Like they would just ignore him. He'd, you know, like whenever he was around, like, you know, he'd go into a shop or something, and if the owner was supporting the boycott or whatever, they'd just pretend he wasn't there.
I love that.
You know,
shit
we're not
so
dealing
much.
with you.
So
yeah, as a community, they all got together and they were just like, you know, get out of here. I'm not actually sure if he was British or Irish though.
I mean, when is this from? The 1800s? There's every chance that this, you know, was a British person. You know, the colonial attitudes from colonists in Ireland have always been really, really bad. So I imagine if it was a British landlord in Ireland, he probably didn't hire an actual Irish person.
Yeah. And so we've got Chloe in the chat also pointing out that this was like 30 years after the Great Potato Famine, where landlordism and liberal economics literally killed millions. So it's like the group that kind of organized this and kind of took, you know, went on from this was Irish National Land League, which I think just became the Irish Land League or whatever. And so it was like absolutely like it was very much to do with that. It was like, you know, like they had been kind of fucked over by the English before, and you know, obviously there's always like an anti-English sentiment in any kind of in any of the colonies or whatever. But so absolutely tied into the the great old there's another name for it, not the potato famine. They say that like there's a more respectful name that I think is in Irish that is, you know, like refers to it as like the great suffering or something like that. And it kind of, the Great Potato Famine kind of like I think makes it seem like it was just like, oh no, the potatoes didn't grow or something like that, when actually it was like a huge thing with like, you know, like there was like a lot of political action from England that you know, that fully that enabled that and forced it to happen, you know. The Great Hunger and Gordon Moore. So it's more than just like a, you know, like a bad harvest or anything like that. It was like it was like a deliberate kind of like a deliberate, I would say, genocidal action as a way of political repression and punishment to the Irish from England. So in modern usage, the term boycott is often used to refer to a specific type of consumer protest where individuals or groups refuse to purchase or use products or services from a particular company or industry. Boycotts are often motivated by a desire to bring about social or political change, and they can be initiated by individuals, organizations, or social movements. Boycotts can have a significant impact on the targeted company or industry, often resulting in financial losses and damage to reputation. They can also serve as a means of raising awareness about a particular issue and promoting public debate and discussion. So to sum up, boycotts started out as a way to peacefully protest against someone like Captain Boycott, and now they're a way for people to band together and try to change things by not supporting certain companies or industries.
I can't get over Captain Boycott.
I know, it's wild. It's like, imagine that being your legacy onto the world. Like, people just were like, fuck this
it's
guy
like your name is Captain
particular.
Dipshit or something.
That is funny. But I think that one of the reasons that I sort of thought this would be a good topic for this week is because, of course, you know, we've seen a certain type of person, you know, extremely mad at a certain company, and you know what they're doing is they're calling it a boycott, but what's actually happening is they're buying lots and lots of a certain type of beer, and then just blowing it up,
like
or some shit, you know,
like when all those people went out and burnt all their Nike shoes and stuff, and like, or they were like buying them to burn them, and like all the people bought all the Dixie Chicks albums and burnt them there as well. It's like, it's wild thinking it's like, well, you just, you don't really get it, do you?
And so this is like a very good opportunity for us to highlight, you know, effective boycotts and, you know, actual things that will affect, you know, corporations or individuals who are,
we should just talk about that a little, because I'm still not super like sure on what the situation is, right? But so there was like basically,
which shows how much of a terrible boycott it is, right?
I know.
I don't know either. Honestly, I just know like
so it's Bud Light, right?
I saw something. Yeah, I saw something on Twitter where there was like a car that was driving by like a Bud Light factory, and the passenger just did the middle finger. And like there was a car behind that was like, this man has been flipping off the Bud Light factory the entire time, and he's like, is this something? What is
practice?
Yeah. So
that's practice for you.
So basically, from what I know, and I'm pretty certain this is correct because they all seem to be going on about it. I've tangentially absorbed a bit of this.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit.
And I think the long and short of it is that Bud Light did a partnership with Dylan Mulvaney, and if you don't know who Dylan Mulvaney is, she's a prominent public figure who is trans, and she does a lot of work to sort of like show her transition, and show the not just the trans youth of America, but transgender people and potential cis allies everywhere that this is what it's like actually to be a trans person.
Like the interesting thing is that I'd never heard of her, and so many of my trans friends have said the same thing, being like, before this, we had never heard of her. We had no idea who she was. And now she's like far more famous than she was beforehand because of all the people that have come out and support. And like, yeah, she might have like, probably lost like some followers initially or something like that, but she's
I think the thing to highlight here is that, because this is something that people said about Hogwarts Legacy, right? We did a show on that with Nicotine, me and Kira, and in terms of people, a lot of the reactionary figures in that particular boycott were saying, oh well, I'm just going to buy Hogwarts Legacy now, I didn't know this game existed, you're doing loads of free advertising for it. But I don't know how you could support the Bud Light boycott, because if you don't know who Dylan Mulvaney is, and you aren't an automatic reactionary kind of person, you're just a normie, and you say, well, what has this Dylan Mulvaney person done? And then you look at her social media, and it's all just her being really happy and having a nice life and just being a really positive kind of person with like there is literally when I look at like Dylan Mulvaney's content and things she said, there's like no negative shit there. Like she doesn't even get mad at stuff. She just like, talks about her trans joy.
Oh, so she's a trans woman.
Yeah, she's a trans woman. So who's like a trans woman
that exists and is not like sobbing all the time.
Yeah.
The wild thing is that it's like, it's not like, and like it's such a minor thing as well. Like, so she did a sponsor, like influencers will do like a sponsored post with a brand or whatever. So on
that's literally what
Instagram page, they sent her some shit. Like they sent her like a custom can or something like that. And she was on her page being like, thanks Bud Light or whatever like that. And so they're acting like, like that was this massive thing that they're trying to shove it down their throats or whatever like that. But it's like, you only would have seen it if you were already following her online. Like, otherwise you've gone out of your way like to shove it down your own throat.
Exactly. It's actually like what they accuse leftists of doing all the time, which is finding things to be offended about. But they're actually doing it themselves. Like they've gone out of their way.
Who would have expected that little turntable situation?
Yeah. The company that brews Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch or whatever it is are actually like a huge Republican donor as well. And they like sponsor like so much stuff, even like fucking like Joe Rogan and stuff like that. So it's like really funny now where it's like the culture war shit has gone on beyond, like it's all in the, like just the random people or whatever, and a lot of Republicans and other reactionary figures are trying to like push back and being like, whoa, everyone's getting a little out of control, and it's like, you made this, But one of the interesting things I thought was like everyone was like, oh damn, Bud Light's gay now. Like, Bud Light got the gay. It's but it's funny because Bud Light has been gay. Bud Light has been gay for a long time.
That's right.
Anything about the history of like, like queer, like legal protests and stuff in the history of America and stuff. There was, so way back in the day, this would have been like in the 60s or something like that. Cause there was some policy that they implemented at their, like at their breweries or whatever like that, that was asking about your sexual orientation or something like that. So people pushed back and they were like, this is actually, like, this is, irrelevant. like your employer shouldn't know anything about it, should have nothing to do with them. And this is a time when, you know, like it was like a really hot button issue. You know, it's the same as like what we're seeing with like the trans panic now. At the time, it was like the gay panic.
Is this the 1977 Coors beer boycott that you're talking about?
No, I think this was even before that.
Was it before that? Even, 70s,
yeah. In the 60s. Okay. But yeah. So and it was one of the best things is that it was like Harvey Milk himself was like the lawyer that took it on and stuff.
Yes.
And so yeah, basically he went around and got him and a group of others and stuff went around to all the gay bars and stuff and stopped getting them to stop Coors. And so they all stopped. A bunch of other people kind of got really shitty, and because Coors, I think they were always like a non-union brewery as well. Bud Light at the time, though, I don't know if it still is, was a unionized brewery though. And so a bunch of other breweries kind of, I guess, like in solidarity with Coors, like would stop stocking or stopped selling their beers to gay bars and stuff, or anyone that was part of this boycott, except for Bud Light. And Bud Light were always like, nah, fuck it, you know, like, you know. And so it's really funny that, you know, after all of this time or whatever like that, people are thinking that like this is a new thing, like they made the beer woke, they made the beer political or whatever like that. It's like, no, like this has always been, there's always been a battleground here or whatever.
I think one of the funny things about it all as well is that you get a lot of people not just saying, you know, fuck Bud Light, or like, you know, I'm boycotting Bud Light. They specifically say I'm boycotting Anheuser-Busch. And Anheuser-Busch is this huge parent company of all these different beers, and we are talking like hundreds of different types of beers. Like if you look at like Anheuser, but like sorry, not Anheuser-Busch. You know, there's so many. Like if you look at like what they own, so just like a quick list here: Budweiser, Corona, Stella Artois, Beck's, Leffe, Hoegaarden, Bud Light, Skol, Brahma. And some of these ones I'm not too sure, but our international audience might know them. Antarctica, Kilmes, Victoria, Modelo Especial, Michelob Ultra, Harbin, Cedrin. You know, there's so many, you know, beers under the Anheuser-Busch parent company. There's absolutely no way that there's going to be, you know, any kind of possibility to boycott all these brands. It's just completely impossible.
There's also like, yeah, there's other stuff as well. Like they've had a history of like, there was the ultra right kind of like went against Bud Light a while back as well. They found out that it was like what was it? It was like there was some kind of thing with another beer that like there was a protest of a bunch of rabbis against, I think it was against Coors, and they found out that I think Bud Light, like there's something about the management or whatever like that I think Coors were like forcing employees to work during Passover or something like that.
Right.
And Bud Light were like, no, like fuck that, you know, it's they should have the time off or whatever. So then all of the, you know, like the Jewish community and even like, you know, the Hasidic Jews and everything like that were just like, Bud Light only from now on, you know, like Bud Light's the only beer. And so they just surged, but then obviously the ultra right were like, it's the Jew beer, you know. So there's like, yeah, it's always been a thing. It's
God, wild. So much around such a shitty tasting beer.
I have no idea. Like, to be honest, like all light beer tastes the same to me. And like whenever I've been in the States, it's weird that like it seems like everyone drinks light beer over there, whereas like over here it's like light beer is like a very like, it's like a small section of what, you know, people drink or whatever. And even like historically it's always been like considered like light beer as like the weak beer that, you know, like you'd never get like as a red-blooded male, you'd never get caught drinking a light beer. You know, that's like the kind of the
it's quite funny because they would say it's gay. Like, you know, if you're like at a bar, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna have a Bud Light, I'm gonna have a Coors Light, and they'd be like, what, you gay? You know, that's like a legitimate thing that's been said to me before. Like, yeah.
That's when you take their hand and you hold it and you start stroking and go, yes, I am.
You kiss them. Well, that's what you do.
Then you kiss them on the lips.
Big kiss. You go, I love you. I love you, comrade. I love you, comrade. Let's have gay sex after drinking light beer.
That's exactly what happens.
Absolutely. And then when we've done that, we then have some delightful pillow talk about historical boycotts.
Yeah, nice segue.
So we've got a bunch of examples here of like kind of big historical ones. There's like so many to choose from though. There's like so many. Yes, so a big one was the Montgomery bus boycott, which most people probably know about. So the Montgomery bus boycott was a civil rights protest that lasted for over a year in Montgomery, Alabama. The boycott began on December 1st, 1955, after Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger. African-American citizens in Montgomery organized a boycott of the city's buses, refusing to ride them until they were integrated. The boycott lasted for 381 days and was marked by protests, arrests, and violent attacks against protesters. In November 1956, the Supreme Court declared segregated buses unconstitutional and the boycott ended. The Montgomery bus boycott was a significant victory for the civil rights movement and marked the beginning of a new phase of the struggle for racial equality in the United States. So that's like not only, so they kept that up. That's like over a year, about like 13 months or 14 months or so. And so that actually ended in the Supreme Court declaring segregated buses unconstitutional. So that's like, unconstitutional is like across the entire United States, which is like a pretty big win, like so that's,
but it's important to note that it wasn't like boycott that lasted like 2 seconds and that did not lead to anything else outside of the boycott that led to that legislative change. It was the boycott, which was, by the way, a very long one, but it spurred a lot of the ripple effects expanded beyond that. And I just point this out because of the way that liberals approach. And whenever the liberals talk about boycotts, they talk about like voting with your dollar and stuff, which is, and then they're like, that's the way you do change. You just shut up. You keep your head down, you stay polite and civil, and then you just quietly buy things, which is not the same.
yeah, totally. And so and another one that we have here is the United Farm Workers grape boycott. So this is one that was like it's a little bit more kind of obscure, but I thought it's an interesting one. So the United Farm Workers, UFW, Great Boycott was a labor protest that began in 1965 and lasted for 5 years. The UFW was a union for migrant farm workers in California who were predominantly Mexican American. The boycott was aimed at growers who refused to recognize the union and provide better wages and working conditions for farm workers. The boycott was marked by protests, consumer boycotts, and negotiations with growers. In 1970, the UFW signed its first collective bargaining agreement with growers, securing better wages and working conditions for farm workers. The Great Boycott was a significant story for the labor movement and for the rights of migrant farm workers. So this is interesting. So this is a 5-year boycott where it's like, so these migrant workers, like you get this all over the place, like, I know it's like a super hot issue thing over in California, but we get it in New Zealand where people come in working from out in the islands and stuff, where it's like they will kind of go into another country or whatever to work there because of the, like their job availabilities, often get paid a lot less because they're, not American citizens. They don't have a lot of the same legal protections and everything like that. So a lot of the time, it's kind of just like you do the job or you don't, and you don't get paid or whatever. There's not much there's not much recourse for bad bosses or anything like that. Like there's no, you can't really do too much about it. Like, so they weren't even able to unionize because they weren't, American workers or whatever. So that was the whole thing with them getting, getting their first collective bargaining agreement with the growers, because so they were basically just being like, okay, you need us to pick the fruit, to pick the grapes and stuff, to sell them. But if we just boycott you, if we say like, okay, cool, you're not willing to negotiate, none of us are going to work for you, then those grapes are just going to fall off the vine, like they're like, that's it. which is, which is like powerful because that threatens, their actual kind of business and stuff. And that's the same thing that's happened over here with our the RSE schemes, where people come in from the islands, and a lot of the time it's agricultural work. And it's like these industries are often like, these are the places where a lot of labor trafficking happens, like a lot of people have these ideas of like human trafficking and labor trafficking being like this thing that's like, these like Eastern European sex ring kind of things or whatever like that. But when you actually look at it, the statistics show that the majority of these things are in the agricultural and construction industry, and these are workers that have very little protections. It does still absolutely happen in the in sex work as well, though. I'm just saying, statistically,
it's a painfully mundane reality, trafficking in terms of that, like, because,
I think like people get sucked into the idea of like the kind of like the really scandalous like idea of like, like this idea of like white women getting abducted from the Target parking lot and being forced into sex trafficking or whatever, whereas like it is overwhelmingly like, like like migrant workers from like, like in America, it's Mexican migrant workers. Over here, it's like from the islands, like Fiji, Tonga, and like Papua New Guinea and stuff, and even like workers from like the Philippines and stuff, coming down and working like construction contracts, agricultural contracts for like wages that from where they're from, it might be like, oh yeah, this is sweet, this is a good good rate or whatever, but over here it's 100% like, it's pennies, and they're getting exploited, and often the times they have to live in shitty makeshift accommodation and all this kind of stuff. So these guys back in 1965, the United Farm Workers, they had a similar thing where it's like they were going up to America, they were making big money for their bosses, they weren't getting paid much, they didn't have any kind of benefits or anything like that. So they just froze them out. They were just like, okay, until you guys come to the table, we're not gonna pick your grapes. And the thing is, it's like if you spend like a year growing all these this fruit, these vegetables, whatever like that, and it doesn't get sold or whatever, you're kind of screwed. So you gotta respect the people that are actually doing that picking for you, even though it's like it's considered like a it's they say it's like unskilled labor or whatever, which is bullshit, because it's like these people, there are skills necessary to doing this job, doing it fast and stuff. Like if you've ever seen like a lot of people that are working in the agricultural industry, like picking fruit and stuff, people that know what they're doing are so much more productive than just like an unskilled
it looks like magic.
It's wild. And like like not bruising the fruit, all this kind of stuff, like it's wild.
God, absolutely.
So so
I think about that whenever I go grocery shopping and I see like a bag of like romaine lettuce or anything. I just visualize like, and I'm trying to do this. I do this with veganism when I see animal products, but now I'm trying to expand it beyond that and not be like a liberal vegan that goes like, if I'm buying plant-based products, I don't have to think about anything. Like, no, you still need to think about shit, right?
Of course, yeah.
And so I think about like all the videos I've seen of like workers in fields and how they quickly do stuff, and like and there's a ton of conversation about like the exploitative exploitative practices that are happening there, but we're talking just about the skills. Like no one you rarely think about that when you're in buying food. It's so alienated away from like the laborers.
Yes.
No, 100%. And it's like, man, like I bruise shit just putting it in the shopping trolley. Like,
well, I don't know what it's like where you two live, but in the UK, certainly people scrutinize vegetables when they buy them at the supermarket. Like,
100%.
You know what I mean? Like you'll pick up and I'll do it as well. Do you know what I mean? Like
avocados.
Squeeze an avocado, or like, pick up some peppers and be like, oh, that one's a bit scuffed. You know what I mean? And it's like, there's nothing wrong with it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just we're just completely brainwashed into being like, no, we have to have these like completely perfect cartoon versions of what
it has to look like the little icons from the Candy Crush crush game or some shit like that. You know, little perfect little melon.
It's absurd. Yeah, it's completely
and that's
absurd.
the thing, like, you know, like with like a lot of organic fruit and stuff, you get it and it's like doesn't look so manicured or whatever, and that's just the reality of what, you know, fruit and vegetables look like. But also it's like over here, I'm not sure it's like down there, but because we export the top quality kind of fruit and vegetable down here that's grown here, so the stuff that we get in the supermarket isn't even like the top quality, because it all gets kind of like, see, if our government has deals with like China and stuff like that, where they get a lot of their produce from us. But so much of it is like, okay, there's like this stuff that gets sent out to export, there's this stuff that goes to supermarkets, and then if it's just like a little bit too bruised or a little bit even just like weird, not perfectly colored or whatever like that, it's just like disposed.
Yeah,
you know? And
Gaskell Garden Project, our episode on that, they spoke about that for sure. Yep.
Yeah. And I know there are people that are kind of moving to kind of like create legislation around this over here. I know France actually has a thing where the supermarkets don't, like, they, instead of throwing it out, or if it's like sitting on the shelf or whatever, instead of just letting it rot there, they have to donate like a certain portion of it, and it goes to like, you know, like soup kitchens and like the city mission and stuff like that, so they can, you know, actually make it into food for people. I would love to see more of that kind of thing happening down here. But yeah, and there are companies that are actually starting to fill that gap as well, where they're like, there's one over here, I think it's called like the Ugly Bunch or something like that, and they will sell you like cheaper fruit because it's like a little bit uglier or whatever, which is like, you know, like when you create a gap in a market-based economy, people are always going to fill that market. I would love to see it more just like, here's the fruit that we were going to throw out, people should just take it. But you know, we're not quite there yet.
Yep.
But yeah, so that was the Great Boycott. And yeah, huge victory for the labor movement, particularly for the rights of migrant workers. But getting a little bit abroad now, well, abroad for one of our hosts. Like, it's like everything's been American so far. But so around the world, the other big one that a lot of people might have heard about, the Salt Satyagraha in 1930. So the Salt Satyagraha was a non-violent protest against British colonial rule in India, led by Mahatma Gandhi in 1930. I think he was still known as Mohandas Gandhi at that point. But yeah, I mean, Gandhi, bit of a shithead, you know, did some good things, kind of a pest, putting it out there. You know, like, great for anti-imperialism, not so good for, you know, like this treatment of, you know, people darker skinned than him, young woman, a lot of other stuff, you know. And also I think like a lot of people just like think of his boycotts in particular, like these protests, like the non-violent protests by themselves, being the thing that shook off you know, the imperial rule of India. But like we were saying before, it's, you know, it's part of a larger thing. Like, you know, everyone knows Mahatma Gandhi was, you know, like non-violent, you know, turn the other cheek, all that kind of stuff. But there's also a lot of other figures like Subhandra Bose, who was like a kind of Indian nationalist leader, who, another super controversial dude, did a lot of great things for anti-imperialism, was pretty tight, you know, good big fan of Hitler, so that's kind of weird, you know, just shit like that. But like, my point is that it wasn't like, you know, like Gandhi didn't send England packing by throwing up peace signs, you know. But but this particular boycott was really effective. So the British government had a monopoly on the production and sale of salt in India. They basically had the market cornered. So Gandhi organized a march to the Arabian Sea to collect salt in defiance of the colonial government. So they basically had it in control, and they were just like, actually, no, we're just going to walk down there and we're just going to get it. And so, yeah, the protest was marked by peaceful marches, civil disobedience, and arrests of protesters. So they basically were like, we are going to boycott the British salt trade. We're just you know, we're getting our own salt now. We're not going to deal with them because, you know, their presence here is a, you know, a foreign imposition, and they shouldn't control our, you know, they shouldn't control the resource that we kind of like the point is they could just walk down to the sea and get it. So, you know, why are these foreigners telling them that, you know, they're in control and that they own it or whatever? So yeah, the Salt Satyagraha drew attention to the injustices of colonial rule in India and helped to mobilize the Indian independence movement. Protest was a significant milestone in India's struggle for independence from British colonial rule. So yeah, so that's kind of was one of the big moments that kind of started kicking things off over there. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Where there's like so many of these corporations that like stake a claim out and say they own something, and it's like at the end of the day, it's like the people wouldn't miss them, you know, like the workers could probably do better without them. I feel like that's like a recurring theme with a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about this time. So yeah, they were basically just like yeah, fuck the British salt industry. We're just gonna, you know, we're gonna go get our own salt by ourselves.
Cool.
And yeah. So that was pretty interesting. What's going on in chat? No idea what's going on here. Always look down.
Oh, like, in the Twitch chat, we are talking about the fact that there was a song that they made us sing in Britain called "Britannia Rule the Waves."
Oh, right.
And it's like one of these really cringe, like "Rule Britannia, Britannia Rule the Waves."
Some like fascist bloody sing
It is. It's fascist imperialism, and they just like, you know, and we're talking like I went to school in the 90s, you know, and they were still making us sing this fucked up song.
I wasn't even born. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
The 90s.
No, you weren't.
So young.
What a joke.
It's so like, to me, as you know, like a person from the South Pacific, it is so like audacious that someone could propose to like rule the waves. Anyways,
right, this is another thing, because yeah, that must be so fucked seeing that in terms of like, yeah, like the whole sort of culture around sea travel in indigenous cultures down there. Oh my gosh.
So another bus boycott, big bus boycott day here on Red Planet today. The bus boycott in Batavia was a non-violent protest against Dutch colonial rule in Indonesia in 1948. So yeah, Batavia was the old name under Dutch rule for Jakarta. And so Indonesian citizens in what is now Jakarta organized a boycott of Dutch-owned buses to protest against the colonial government's policies. The boycott was marked by peaceful protests, negotiations with the colonial government. The protests drew attention to the injustices of colonial rule in Indonesia and helped to mobilize the Indonesian independence movement. So same thing with the Indian independence movement, started off with these boycotts. So the bus boycott in Batavia was a significant milestone in Indonesia's struggle for independence from Dutch colonial rule. I just realized that I structured so many of these paragraphs exactly the same because I was writing up my notes.
Tim, they're great. They're absolutely.
I know. There's lots of significant milestones, people. So I think it was just like these two that I did back to back. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah. So the Dutch, who you know, at the time were the colonial kind of landlords of Jakarta. This was a way for the people to fight back, because you know, you can't always just start by jumping out in the streets and, you know, flipping over cars or whatever like that. So this was like a consumer boycott that kicked off a lot of that. There was obviously, you know, other things happening at the time, but this was a way for the average person just to kind of like to partake in a protest against the government, where it's like, okay, these companies are Dutch owned, but there's one that's local owned. So everyone will just use that. It doesn't matter if it doesn't come as often. It doesn't matter if, you know, the buses are a little bit, you know, they aren't as fancy or whatever like that. We'll just support the local business. It's going to be better for our people, and also send a message to, you know, to the colonial government. So, yeah, so that was another one that was super successful and then graduated into bigger things, which I think is a common theme with some of these with all of these boycotts so far, they all kind of led into, like further things down the track. And then so the last one that I've got here is the anti-apartheid boycott. So this is one that is like New Zealand's participation in this has kind of become like a huge, like, I think like a point of like national pride or whatever. But yeah, so anti-apartheid boycott was like it was a global thing as well. It wasn't just like, while it was happening down here in New Zealand, it was happening all around the world. So South Africa, they obviously had the apartheid system, like a system of racial segregation. Like they really kind of wrote the book on it, and it's the book that other people have picked up since, like Israel with their apartheid system, living on Palestinian land, and so and it went all the way until the end of apartheid in 1994. So this is decades and decades of boycotting. So it was aimed at isolating South Africa politically, economically, and culturally. And so this had so many different effects. Like, there was like, entire industries that were shutting out South Africa because of apartheid, and basically like, like their entire treatment of Black South Africans, like, the people whose land that they, like the South Africans who are like the descendants of, Dutch and German settlers and stuff, and basically, set themselves up as the top, I think it's like the top 2% or something like that.
Yep.
And and carved a little fortress out for themselves there.
There's a great video by Third World Myths Explores that I just want to give a shout out. In fact, it's a series about apartheid South Africa, and I watched a bit of it on my stream a month or so ago. And just in one of the episodes, the way that you could see like parallels to Nazi Germany, parallels to apartheid Israel, like is so like clearly obvious. I really don't think people understand just how bad apartheid South Africa was, because I think they just see it as a like, oh well, they just let Black people work in one area and thingies, white people work in the other area. But it was so much more insidious and violent and horrific than that. This was all about enabling of militant fascist groups to go around and assault people, Black people, indigenous Black people, on their land.
They were creating an ethno state, like a white ethno state, and a lot of it was what a lot of people don't know. It's like they think that like basically like the white people just carved out this little hole and they were just like, this is for us or whatever. But there was like this whole thing they had called the homelands, where they basically they decided where like they kind of like sent different groups of like of different like groups of Black people, like ethnic groups, cultural groups, and gave them new homelands and sent them there, and fully just like excommunicated them from, separated communities, did all this kind of stuff. And they were basically like, this is where you guys live now, this is where you guys live, whatever, which obviously led to like so many, different problems. So like this wild thing of not just kind of setting themselves up, but also kind of just absolutely fucking over everyone else at any opportunity they could. Like it's fucking wild. Like they planned it from the ground up to be like a very strict ethno state. It's like, I think a lot of those, like you get these like weird right leaning people these days that try and romanticize what it was, and they say like, like all these people that are like big Rhodesia fanboys or whatever, and they're just like, it's just like people trying to carve out a little community for themselves, like it's just like some little commune up in the hills. It's like, no, this was like a fascist
dude. I had this exact thing with my stepdad this weekend. He's a conservative Jewish Zionist man. And so he's very much like, you know, when I was just having the conversation, like saying like, oh, you know, I learned about apartheid South Africa and the similarities with Nazi Germany. And he was like, no, they didn't plan to genocide loads of, you know, indigenous African people. And I was like, the Germans, they didn't like say, we're going to murder all these Jews. It wasn't in the policy thing. They just said, we're going to send them to these different fucking places. And then, you know, they use that as an excuse to get away with killing them. Like, I don't think you understand. They didn't run on like, we're gonna murder Jews. They just like did it, you know. And that's you could absolutely say that was what they were trying to do in South Africa.
Yeah, so, there are huge parallels with like what Israel is doing now. I see some people talking in the chat talking about it. There's a huge community of South African expats, of Afrikaners who have moved to Israel and converted to Judaism because, you know, and there's like these interviews with these people, there's like documentaries about it where they're talking about how much they love it because it reminds them of apartheid and how, you know, and how they miss that system, which is like just, you know, it's wild.
I could just imagine like them going over there and like, you know, maybe like having an interview with someone and they'll be like, oh, it's definitely not apartheid, but it's very similar. Like, you know, so, you know, it reminds me of the apartheid days, but it's not apartheid. That's not happening. Like, you know, how are they actually like talking about this?
Yeah. And you see these people like not just like, you know, attacking Palestinians and dispossessing them of their land, but also the Christian minority in Israel, which are predominantly like a lot of the Christians there are Arabs and African, like North African Christians, like Ethiopian and stuff, and even like Ethiopian Jews, which like for a lot of the time they get attacked as well. You know, it's like it's wild. So it's like it's very much like they enjoy I would say the racial segregation of the apartheid system. But so the anti-apartheid boycott went on for decades because South Africa held on really strong there because they did have a lot of industry that they were using to like still trade with the rest of the world and stuff, which is a thing. Like, you know, with a lot of resources or a strong enough industry, a company or a country can hold out against a boycott for a while, you know, like they can weather that storm a little bit. So, the protests were pretty effective though in showing people what actually was happening over there. The really significant one in New Zealand and also in Australia was the Springbok rugby tour. So, and there was a couple of them, right? Yes. Every time because rugby is like the national game over here. It's like the same as like football in England or like, you know, I don't know, basketball or something in whatever Americans are into.
NFL
or American football. Yeah.
Which is basically rugby, let's face it. It's rugby with armor.
It's like yeah, and lots of rugby players end up going over there to play for them because they offer them ridiculous salaries. But so it was like the national game, and so a bunch of times they would come over and people would try and organize boycotts, and they kind of like it happened a couple times, and it like, you know, it kept going ahead or whatever, and then it built up to one point where it was just way too big and they couldn't stop it. And, you know, this is like groups of people storming the field and like doing all kinds of stuff, like, or even just like any other rugby game that they, you know, like the people organizing it or the teams had you know, like had shown support for the Springboks, or like, you know, like for the whole thing to go ahead anyway. People were just protesting everywhere. But the thing is, it was like so these days we look back at it as this like, you know, people frame it in this kind of like really liberal revisionist kind of way where it's like, this is the time that our country stood up and said no or whatever. But it was actually a very small group of dedicated people who just continually like kept at it and kept kind of like bringing attention to it. And the newspapers were writing articles, like hit pieces about like individual protesters being like, this person is like an enemy to democracy and all this kind of stuff. And to be honest, it was mainly it was like a lot of anarchists, communists. It was hugely Maori, and there was a lot of actual like really well-known Maori rugby players that said, why, like, two other fellow Maori players, like, why are you playing why are you playing with them in a game against, like, why are you kind of supporting the system that is kind of like similar to what we went through in the past? Like, why are you, like, like, you of all people should see like what's happening here and you should stand up against it. There was one guy in particular, I can't remember his name, but he was like a really famous All Black, like one of the biggest players, and they were just like, they tried to destroy him over it, like, because he was considered like, like, he was someone that had made it. He'd got a seat at the table. He was a good Maori or whatever like that. And then he was just like, no, fuck it. So yeah, so that was a huge thing. Some of the people that were involved in it went on to become like, like Greens MPs and like famous like union organizers and stuff. Some of them went on to be kind of, I don't know, shitty, but whatever. Yeah, it's one of those things that it was for us, even though like, yeah, like eventually, like that alongside with a bunch of other things kind of led to, I guess, kind of like exposing apartheid for what it was and helping embolden, like protesters all around the world and within South Africa. Like, I know Nelson Mandela specifically spoke about seeing the Springbok tour boycott and being like, it made us feel like people could see what was happening, and like it really kind of energized us, which is amazing. But I think it was like, it was the people in South Africa, the Black people that were fighting that system that really brought it down. But I think that the boycotts actually, helped put pressure on from the outside. So I don't want to like, make it sound like, oh yeah, and then, through boycotting a rugby game, racism was solved. Or anything like
it was defeated.
It was part of a wider strategy, and something that definitely, I think, for organizing in New Zealand, even though, like, even moving on from apartheid once that system was ended, so many people that were organizing there went on to kind of maintain that momentum and put it into other things, other progressive kind of other progressive kind of causes and stuff. So it's like, yeah, again, like started with a boycott, then moved on to, like a whole bunch of other things, which is great. But yeah, so and then yeah, 1994 they ended apartheid, and so a whole bunch of white South Africans just randomly chose to move to Australia, New Zealand, and a bunch of other countries for no reason whatsoever. Got nothing to do with apartheid ending and, like Black Africans getting, getting their rights, whatever. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Yeah, I'm sure none of those people still have really harmful views and wish to influence our politics in particular ways.
So harmful that it led them to like relocate to a new continent.
Yeah, exactly. They got like super sweet deals in a lot of places. Because New Zealand has this thing where like there was like New Zealanders fought in like the South African War way back in the day. So they like have always, like, the New Zealand government has always had these deals for South African people to move here and set up. So yeah, I remember when I was young and like, yeah, sort of like 94-ish sort of thing, South African kids popping up at school and being like, oh, I've never met a South African person before. And all of a sudden there's like a whole bunch of them. And it's like, wonder what your dad did. Like,
Oh my God.
And there's like a bunch I've tattooed them before. I've heard wild stories from people who lived under apartheid, but as, like from either side, actually, because there's a lot of like Black South Africans that live over here as well, people saying wild shit about, like, there was a guy that I tattooed who said that his family moved over here because of how dangerous it was over there. And the danger was him explaining the story of his granddad owned this gigantic farm that basically, like, was like food production for the entire area or whatever. And one night he killed a man who climbed the wall of their compound and broke into some like food store. And so he saw this guy, an unarmed man, he shot him, killed him, It was a black guy who he then recognized was one of his employees, or one of the farm workers and stuff. And so for them, they were like, oh, this is too dangerous. We have to leave. It's like, wow, how dangerous do you think it is for your poor employee who had to climb into your compound knowing that you were armed to break into a food storage place? You know, it's like,
I remember this story.
Fucking wild. Yeah, I think I mentioned it once before. I think like just after it happened, I mentioned it on stream. But it's just it's wild thinking that like those people are the ones that are like, you know, they have like such a, you know, these are the white replacement people, you know, like these
literally
are the fucking idiots that like think of themselves as the victims, you know.
I know it's the same type of theme with white people in America. Like when I talk to my mom and stuff, and she's talking about an area that's dangerous, it's always about like property theft or someone who is. It's always about some sort of person that's like breaking into a home or breaking into a car or someone stealing a purse, and that's always the height of like the worst thing that you can imagine as a white person.
Right. Yeah. True. Yeah. It's always like, oh, you know, in the UK, people would actually say like an extremely racist thing, like, oh, that area is proper ghetto, you know.
Yeah. It's like, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. What are you fucking on about? Ghetto? Like, I never like you know, like use that term to describe any area, even if it was like a majority, you know, place where racialized people are concentrated. It's like, you know, you're just like, oh yeah, you'll get your wallet nicked there, you'll get mugged and that, and it's like, yeah, it's always about being mugged, isn't it? It's like, it's not like, oh yeah, you'll actually get like murdered or whatever. It's just ridiculous.
But also do want to shout out that there are some amazing anti-racist organizers that are people that lived through apartheid as being a white person or whatever, and then have gone off around the world and have done really great things. I know some white Jewish organizers from South Africa who have done some amazing things over here in New Zealand. One of them in particular kind of was the one that put together the that got Lord to boycott Israel. Israel made a big statement about it and everything like that. And now Israel are basically like, if you ever come, you know, if you ever come through our airspace or in anywhere that we have influence, we will make you stand trial because of you know, your crimes against Israel. We're basically writing a letter to Lord and being like, hey, you shouldn't play in Israel because they're really shitty. And so, you know, to be her as a South African Jewish Israeli person as well, it's like, that's, you know, like, oh, you can never really go, you know, back to your home or whatever because the government there is so corrupt, and, you know, because they are, you know, running an apartheid system. So yeah, it must be really shitty to be someone whose family has come from one apartheid system, to know that like your kind of, you know, like your culture and your identity is so like tied up with this group that are basically doing the same thing now, you know. So I think that's why you do get a lot of people from that background that are very you know, vehemently opposed to that whole, you know, that whole thing. So yeah, so that was all of the historical examples, but yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the idea of well, actually, it's not the end of the historical examples because there's more coming. There always is. But yeah, like,
you thought you'd escaped it, listeners.
Yeah. Of like the economic boycott. You know, like what it generally means or whatever. So it's yeah, basically just it's a tool to exert political pressure on a country or organization, and doing it by encouraging consumers, businesses, or even like governments, you know, which is like the case with the anti-apartheid thing, to stop buying goods or services that are associated with the you know, the target of the boycott. So the goal of an economic boycott is to inflict economic harm on the target. So, you know, to cost it money, whether it's through sales or whether it's through, you know, just like whatever service they provide, or even like, you know, like sometimes by refusing to deal with a company, like you know, like a supplier can refuse to deal with a company, so that like, okay, so, you know, we're a restaurant but we need food but we can't buy it, as opposed to like, you know, because our suppliers won't deal with us because they're boycotting us, as opposed to just like, you know, like we don't go and eat at that restaurant because they're shitty, whatever. um yeah, and like through that, obviously, you know, to leverage that economic harm to, you know, make some kind of change, or to I guess like to like, you should have a goal going into it, you know, like this is what we want out of this, is what we want them to do. We want them to end apartheid, we want them to, you know, like desegregate buses, whatever. Yeah, another one that I wanted to mention about, because it's a similar one to some of the other ones that we've talked about, is the Arab League boycott of Israel, which began in 1948. So after the establishment of the State of Israel, so basically Israel was set up so to, you know, basically by the UK and the UN, you know, the UN by way of the UK or whatever, as, you know, the state for Jewish people dispossessed by the Holocaust. You know, obviously they wanted a safe place, like a homeland or whatever. And a lot of places around the world were like, you know, come here, whatever. There was even like a group from my tribe, Napui, who like basically were like, we will donate. They're like a group that are like quite intensely Christian, and they just had this idea that like they were like, we should make the new Jerusalem up north, and, you know, we'll give them land for a homeland or whatever. And they were like, no, like we appreciate it, but no thanks or whatever. We kind of have somewhere we want to go. And yeah, which is, it's really strange. But right. Yeah, so and so the UK and the UN and all of their, you know, whatever wisdom, basically were like, well, have this chunk of Palestine, you know, and Palestine was obviously a land with people already there, you know, whatever. They weren't too fussed about that, which, you know, to the you know, to the discomfort of many people watching at the time.
If you want to know about, like, you know, how did the UK get to decide this? It's colonialism. It was colonialism. The British annexed Palestine and then basically said, okay, we're going to turn this into Israel now. And yeah.
Well, because like the people of, you know, who soon to be Israel or whatever, they were like, well, this is kind of, you know, like our holy land anyway, and it, you know, just lines up that you guys kind of own our, you know, chunk of our own holy land at the moment. So, and everyone watching at the time was like, it's kind of weird because they already live there. Like, you know, there's already people living there. Do you have to make a new state? Can't they just go live there?
Yes.
Yeah. So they ended up being like, okay, well, yeah, you know, like, obviously these people can coexist. We'll give them a little chunk of land of Palestine. They can live there, and then, you know, the Palestinian people can go about doing their things. And people of Palestine were obviously like a little bit kind of weird about it, but in general, they actually kind of were like, okay, no, like, you know, like you know, Jewish people have always lived here. That, like, you know, many of us are Jews, we're Arab Jews, and, you know, like a lot of these, like the people of Palestine were the direct descendants of the people that have always lived there, whereas a lot of the people coming in with Israel, some of them were direct descendants, others were people that like culturally Jewish people from other ethnic groups around the world and stuff. So, you know, like a bit of a mixed people, but, you know, the Palestinians went like, come on in. And for a long time it was like, you know, like I know people whose parents had passports that said, you know, like citizen of Israel, Palestine, you know, like, and it was like a thing together. And, you know, everyone thought like, okay, cool, you know, this is going to ride or whatever. But it didn't really take too long before things started not being cool. Israel started kind of expanding their borders, just, you know, more people coming in all the time, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like, you know, to the point where it was like, you know, like conflict was inevitable. And so pretty soon into the creation of Israel, people started saying, you know, a lot of the countries surrounding them, which became what they called the Arab League, were like, no, like this is, you know, this is a colonial project. We are not going to deal with Israel. Like, we're just going to ice them out. We're going to boycott everything. No, you know, like no businesses, no imports, no exports, anything like that. Through Israel's ties to like America and the UN and UK and stuff, they were able to kind of survive through it, though, you know, like they kind of weathered it. And, you know, like Israel still exists largely because of like billions and billions of dollars coming through from America, because, you know, they obviously have a lot of business interests in the area, business and military interests in the area. So yeah, so this boycott was basically saying no trade or anything like that, because they are, you know, at this point they were like, yeah, they're killing our people, you know, like people that have always been there, people, other Arab people, and you know, they're basically becoming this this little imperial, like a lot of people, like I've even heard American military figures referring to it as like thinking of it as like a naval base, except instead of the middle of the sea, it's in the middle of the Middle East, you know?
Yeah, literally. And the BDS, the boycott list is extremely big. By the way, you can sort of have a look at this if you go to bdsguide.com. There's loads of stuff on there. Just some that I've picked out while Tim's been basically telling us about this are, for example, Powerade. Every single version of Powerade is on the list. Noted celebrity Simon Cowell donated $150,000 specifically to the IDF, the people who literally kill Palestinian
so the IDF
children.
is the Israeli Defense. What is it?
Israeli Defense Force, which is an oxymoron.
Yeah,
because
Force. I was thinking, I was like, Force Fund.
Yeah. It's an oxymoron because they are not really under attack.
It's like a standing army that, you know, attacks outwards. They go down into neighborhoods and push around unarmed civilians. They shoot, you know, they shoot Red Cross medics. It's wild. And it is the thing. It's like there's a mandatory military service where when you hit a certain age, I think it's when you're in your late teens, they get you in, and it becomes this thing where like because I know friends that have been through it, and I've had friends that have avoided it as well.
I went on a date with a person who refused military service in Israel.
And so like I know a guy that went through it, and he said that it like they make it like it's like school camp or something like that, and it's all fun, and there's like this really kind of like there's this thing amongst the young men where they like kind of it's like this thing of like this macho man thing where it's like they give you the guns, they give you the arm, and they send you down with your boys down to this neighborhood, and they, you know, tell you like, oh, go around and like, you know, just push them around a little bit and stuff, and like things escalate from there. And because they have the backing of, you know, Israel or whatever, they know they can get away with like anything, you know. And so and it literally ends up in like people getting killed all the time, you know, and like children getting killed, just random people getting killed, people like like Arabs,
they particularly
like,
they particularly focus recruitment on individuals who have like noted poor mental health, and in terms of like, you know, this is aside from the mandatory military service, like, you know, when they like, you know, come to the end of the mandatory military service, they see how they've acted, like, you know, and if they are irrational, if they are like, you know, sociopathic, they tend to favor those for like actual recruitment into the IDF, which is so fucking insidious. It's like they also like, you know, have a look at like how nationalistic they are, like how nationalistic you know,
it's like a huge part of it as well, like so the BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, was set up in the early 2000s, and it's like a global campaign run by a bunch of Palestinian organizations that all got together so yeah, the Arab League were a group, like that was kind of like a group of Arab countries surrounding Israel or whatever. Whereas and they kept a blacklist of everyone, like anyone that they found like trading with them or doing things, whatever like that. They kept a big list. And then so yeah, eventually in the 2000s, BDS kicked off. And yeah, so they maintain a huge list these days of all the companies that are and aren't, Israeli run. And like, and it can be anything. Like SodaStream is an Israeli company. There's like those little stands at the mall where people try and sell you cosmetics and stuff like that. It's like all kinds of stuff is and it's like that's they're getting, aside from all the money they get from the States and stuff, there's all money that's going back to Israel to back up their apartheid system, so yeah, so there's a whole bunch of companies. I recommend everyone looking into it and seeing, because you probably find that there's like some company that something that you use every day.
Yeah, Coca-Cola. Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, Coca-Cola, Capri-Sun, Nestle Corn Flakes, Nesquik, breakfast cereal, Shreddies, UK and Ireland. There's so many, literally. I think there's some other popular brands here. Yeah, there's just loads. If you just go to BDS, BDS Guide, all one word.com, Ovaltine as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of celebrities as well, especially musicians and stuff that there's like a lot of musicians that have played shows there and released really like shitty, disappointing statements about why they chose to do it. Like
Paul
I remember
McCartney.
there was one from Nick Cave as well, and I was like, come on, dude. Like,
I
didn't expect this from you.
Nick Cave is also like a transphobe from what I know as well. Yeah, so he's he's like really gone down a bit of a shit sort of line recently. Yeah, some other celebrities, some other musicians that I was quite surprised about were Radiohead, for example. Radiohead have defended their decision to play shows on occupied Palestinian territories. Also, unfortunately, Lady Gaga, who we spoke about recently, literally on this show, she loves Tel Aviv, and the Israeli press went, huge with this. They were like, oh, she had a very emotional show with those fans. She loves it here, and all this kind of stuff. Well, so they kind of ran with it.
One of the most interesting like musical kind of statements I saw about it was years ago. This was like 2019, 2018 or something like that. They did the Eurovision contest in Tel Aviv, and so a bunch of people decided like, we're not gonna fucking do it, like because Eurovision countries kind of have their musical act and they send them over there or whatever, and so a lot of musicians and bands and stuff that got it actually pulled out, and they were like, nah, we're not going to do that. So like a lot of the times a lot of the groups that went there weren't actually the pick from the country, it was like the second or third one or whatever. And so there's one group that was from Iceland, a band called Hatari, who people might know. They're kind of like a really abrasive industrial kind of queer band. They did it, and everyone was like, oh, fucking, Atari, like, what are you guys doing? That's not what you're about or whatever. And so they like when they performed, they ended up getting fined, because when they came out they were wearing I think they were wearing keffiyeh, and they had like Palestinian flags and stuff, and everyone was like, okay, cool, but you still went, like, what's up with that? And then during the and I think someone else, like I think Madonna did the same thing, but during the whole Eurovision contest or whatever, Hatari then released a video of them. They had like snuck out of Israel like at some point during the trip or whatever like that, and recorded a music video in Palestine with a bunch of like local Palestinian queer artists and things like that. And then and then they snuck back in to do this or whatever like that, and Israel went off at them. They were like, you cannot you cannot mix politics with entertainment or whatever like that. And they were just like, well, that's what we do, you know. So
no politics in my music.
So it was kind of cool how they brought it around. You know, like so they kind of, you know, like they used the platform that Eurovision had given them in Israel to kind of further the cause, you know, which I thought was really interesting and a really good way, especially because of you know, especially being queer artists and then working with Palestinian queer artists and like, you know, like the kind of history of kind of repression in the area. Israel does like to make out like it is like this bastion of queer rights in the Middle East, but it absolutely is not, you know.
John the Duncan has a fantastic YouTube video about this that he made recently. I forget the title. If someone in the chat could tell me, so we can for our listeners if they wanted to Google it. But just check out his channel, John the Duncan. He's a friend of mine. He's a fantastic creator.
Is it his most recent one? Or
what's it called?
Transphobia and the liberal panic or something like that? Or
no.
Okay, all right.
It's called Pride. It's
called Pride. Okay. Pride, and why I was ashamed to be there.
Yeah. I also, now that we have a moment, I wanted to mention that Israel does reach out to artists and often, almost probably always, bribes them to come over. Like Israel has so much money. America does a ton to make sure that Israel is like completely and utterly just swimming in money, so they can just throw it everywhere. They give money to their own youth to be able to go on social media and just write nice, wonderful things about Israel, and they'll give.
They literally have a department, like a government department, focused on like social media propaganda that is just like putting like, you know, like people in a room and paying them like a decent wage to just like shit post about how awesome Israel is. There's like, you know, these like Twitter accounts where these like people like all saying the same kind of things and stuff, and it's like you can get university credits for it and stuff. It's like fucking wild.
Oh my gosh.
It's like
I remember Demi Lovato, if you know her, she's a pop star. She was paid I think it was like $150,000 to come to Israel and to be like baptized in like what did she do? She got baptized in the Jordan River, and she like posts all on Instagram, and then she wrote this quote unquote apology where she's like, I'm so sorry. Like, I accepted a free trip to Israel in exchange for a few posts, and no one told me there'd be anything wrong with going or that I would offend anyone. It was supposed to be like a spiritual journey for me and not a political statement. And I'm so sorry that I'm not more educated. These people
paying you all this money to do this?
And like if someone's like, here's $150,000, I don't call that first of all, that's not a spiritual experience.
It would be a spiritual experience, you know, being lifted out of poverty. I'm
spiritual about this money right now.
You know, like, but other than that, yeah, for sure.
But she, like, just for the record, she gave the shittiest apology where she's just like, I'm sorry, I'm not more educated, and sorry for thinking this trip was just a spiritual experience. That's her big apology. I love my fans, everyone. Like, give me a break.
So I think it would be important to point out here that there is a more concentrated list on who and what to boycott at the moment, because of course there are so many different people who have supported Israel in so many ways at the moment. It can be a little bit overwhelming to sort of look at this and go, well, what exactly should I do? But if you go to the website bdsmovement.net and go to get involved and what to boycott, they have seasonal things that they are focusing on. For example, Hewlett Packard, they help run biometric ID systems that Israel used to restrict Palestinian movement.
Sabra hummus, shitty hummus is also part of it. I post about this on my Twitter. And if anyone, actually, don't worry about it. If you want the thread, you can find it, I guess. But you can find the information yourself. It's pretty easy.
There's a New Zealand company called Rocket Lab that are like the darlings of like space exploration and launching, you know, sort of like in New Zealand or whatever. They're just like this big company that, you know, they're super shit. They're like, but they do surveillance stuff for Israel and the US military, setting up,
Who does?
it's a company called Rocket Lab.
Oh, okay, okay.
they even like their launch pad they built on Maori land, on I think it's Ngāti Rongo Wahine, I think it's their land. And they were like, if you build this here, there's absolutely no military payloads to be launched. Like we don't want any like kind of military application of this equipment if you're setting up on our land. And then they're just like, okay, well, it's not military, but it's like surveillance for corporations that sell this information to the military, just like
they're called the IDF. They're all it's in the name that they're just trying to lie. They're just straight up lying about what they're doing. Like, give me a break. I should also say that Hewlett Packard, like you said, HP, but I want to make it clear that they also provide and operate technology that Israel uses to maintain apartheid, including like surveillance. So that's also
because that's a huge part of maintaining that system. Like, part of what Israel does throughout Palestine is the checkpoint system and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, there's infrastructure that supports that. Yeah.
I just realized that Israel is like the worst example on the planet of I'm just asking questions guy. Where he's just like nothing's ever what he's actually doing. He's just innocently there.
Yeah, they have this thing, they call it Hasbara, Hasbara, which is like, it means explaining. And that's, that Hasbara kind of program is what they get the students in to just explain things on Twitter and on Facebook and all this kind of shit like that. And it's fucking wild if you look into it. They get university credits and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, we should move on from that and talk about how so social media has changed the way that people can carry out these boycotts and made them a lot more effective in many ways. Social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have given boycott organizers a powerful tool to mobilize supporters and spread their message quickly and widely. One of the main advantages of using social media for boycotts is that it allows organizers to reach a large audience quickly and at low cost. Through social media, boycott organizers can share information, videos, images, and hashtags, which can go viral and attract widespread attention. Social media also allows boycott organizers to engage with supporters and respond to criticisms or concerns. Another advantage of using social media for boycotts is that it allows customers to share their opinions and experiences with a wider audience. For example, consumers can use social media to share photos or videos of products that they have boycotted or to express their dissatisfaction with a company's policies or practices. These posts can reach a large audience and can put pressure on companies to address their concerns. So this is like a super easy thing you can do. Like, like I've done this before. I remember posting up, there was an artist dude that does a bunch of murals around town who was kind of like outed as being like a serial predator, serial rapist. And he has a bunch of murals around town already, all around New Zealand actually. And he had there was places that continued to work with him after this was found out, people still hiring him for murals, even though you could, like everyone knew or whatever. I remember I took a photo of one at this place that we're at and it was like, fuck this place, don't go here. Like, this is new. Everyone knows what this guy is up to and they hired him to do this. They could have hired someone else or whatever. And, and then like a bunch of other people were like, oh shit, didn't know that was one of his. Good thing, fuck that guy. Like, we're not going to support any businesses that, support them or whatever. So it's like a super easy thing that you can just do like with social media now, where you can like, easily get the word out to friends or whatever like that, especially if you have some kind of following or whatever like that. You start a hashtag, whatever like that, to draw attention to these things. It's like literally something anyone can start with, the phone in their hand, whatever. But but I mean, the problem is that social media can also be super crowded and noisy, and it's like even at the best of times, you're still competing for people's attentions and stuff. So unless, it can be hard to kick off something like that without an existing kind of following or whatever. And the other thing, obviously, is that if you if you're a real big lefty, or your friends are lefties as well, you could try starting a boycott or whatever, and you might only be reaching people that already agree with you. you know, like which I think is a thing that happens often, and not that it's a bad thing, because it's like if they already agree with you but they don't know what's up, then that, you know, can help. But yeah, to really get outside of that, you have to look bigger than, you know, just your own social media or whatever, and that's when people, you know, start making more public demonstrations and things like that. But there have been a bunch of really effective social media boycotts. In 2017, following a decision by Uber to lift its surge pricing during a taxi strike in New York City, protesting President Trump's travel ban. So Trump put out the travel ban on Muslim countries, and a bunch of taxis were like, okay, taxi drivers were like, fuck it, like, you know, we're Muslim and you're banning, you know, travel to and from our home countries, like, fucking, you know, try get a cab now, you know. So the taxi drivers went on strike, and during that time, Uber were like, let's crank up the surge pricing because people don't have an alternative, you know. So a campaign was launched, was hashtag delete Uber, which urged people to just delete the app and switch to using competing companies. And it gained a lot of traction across, you know, Twitter, other social media stuff. And they had a huge amount of people deleting the app, switching to other services. And that was even when a lot of other competing services initially got, you know, like a huge chunk of their user base from people deleting Uber. From
Uber sucks. Delete. My God, just a horrible. Yeah.
Another one was Stop Funding Hate. So it was a UK-based campaign that aims to encourage advertisers to withdraw their support from media outlets that promote hatred, discrimination, and division. The campaign uses social media to target companies that advertise in publications such as the Daily Mail and The Sun, urging them to withdraw their support. The campaign has been successful in persuading several companies, including Lego, John Lewis, and Waitrose, to withdraw their advertising from these publications. So this is something that we have talked about before on here about, you know, one way to really hit a lot of these businesses or even like conservative kind of media outlets is to hit them in, their advertisers, because that's, you know, that's basically how they get shit going, you know.
That's why Elon Musk is so desperate to say,
shout out to our boy Elon Musk, our special boy.
Yeah, he's desperate to be like, oh yeah, the advertisers are coming back. They're definitely coming back. It's all cope, right? Because he's deleted essentially the entire moderation team, sacked them all.
Elon, if you're watching, I have faith in you. Okay? I know you can do it.
What's like the $30 billion lawsuit, and is it in Germany against Twitter?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
because they have such strict laws against like Nazi shit, basically. And the only team that was handling all of that stuff and like basically preventing them from getting sued by Germany, because to operate in Germany, you have to, you know, like you have to go by these standards or whatever. He fired them all. They were like the first people that he fired. So yeah, the lawsuit is for about $30 billion, which is currently like way higher.
Sounds like you just hate free speech.
Twitter's actual value.
Sounds like
I do hate free speech.
Same, actually.
Come at me, Elon. So yeah. So Stop Funding Hate is another big one. And the other one, which is like more of like a group that kind of do a whole bunch of stuff, is Sleeping Giants, who they're a campaign aiming to persuade companies to withdraw advertising from websites and media outlets that do the same thing as Stop Funding Hate, basically, any hate speech and bigotry stuff. So yeah, they do the same thing, urging people to withdraw support. They've been really successful persuading Amazon, Nestle, and The Guardian to withdraw advertising from these sites, which is like, I think is like kind of ironic, considering like Nestle are another big one with, you know, Israel and stuff like that. It's like, man, okay, well, you know, like like I do think that, I mean, this is like something that, you know, we can talk a little bit more about, but yeah, I think it's like a lot of the times, you like a lot of these boycotts for companies like this will end up addressing the downstream stuff, like, you know, like the people that are doing that hate speech on fucking, you know, their whatever, you know, what's, you know, like Tucker Carlson or some shit like that, pulling his advertisers or whatever like that. Whereas like I think that like there's the stuff upstream from that, which, you know, is like things like the fucking state of Israel and, you know, stuff like that. Yep. Like, you know, and it's kind of like, you know, yeah, it's like hitting the heads on the whack-a-mole machine or whatever like that, where it's like, you know, like they're just going to keep coming. But yeah, so, but yeah, the other side of that, because it's kind of a double-edged sword, is that boycott organizers and supporters can get a lot of harassment and backlash from people who oppose the boycott, which is something that we saw a lot with the Harry Potter fucking Hogwarts game boycott, where, so the people that were talking about boycotting were, like, from everything that I saw, extremely chill, but then like the people that were being the scabs, the people that were knowing about the boycott and intentionally doing it anyway, knowing about J.K. Rowling, what she's about, they got so fucking butthurt that they, you know, they were like crying on stream when people were like there's like the famous video that was going around of like the couple that was streaming the game or whatever, and there's like just a couple people in the chat like being like, hey, look, longtime fan of yours, but disappointed in what you're doing, you know, like this sucks, like, you know, as a trans person, as a queer person, as a whatever, like this is kind of like, it's bumming me out because I thought you guys were, you know, like allies and that, you know, you've been historically been pretty good. And then, you know, and then so the woman, she I can't remember her name, but so it's like it's a couple, it's a guy and a girl, and she, you know, got really emotional about it, and she ended up taking like a 5-minute break from the stream, came back, played it some more for a couple of hours, played it all through the next day or whatever like that. But that one moment of her, like, you know, getting upset and crying and having to take a time out got blown up to being this thing like, these boycotters are like, you know, like harassing people and, you know, ruining their livelihoods, forcing them off stream and all this kind of stuff. And then, which was like absolutely not true. And then and then it got flipped around, so it was like all of these like reactionaries, all these like shitheads that were like, you know, like trying to like hunt people down that had like spoke about the boycott or whatever, one of them being like friend of the stream, Jesse Gender, who had made a video about it a while back, like before any of that stuff had actually happened. You know, and just harassing her like ridiculous, like to, you know, like just like, yeah, just really excessive levels, you know, like way beyond what anyone had ever said to any of the streamers or anything like that. And just like, you know, so it's like there is this pushback where it's like, if you are a public face, then you know, and you attach yourself to a boycott or you talk about it or whatever like that, it's like you risk this kind of pushback, and that can sometimes also just be in like literal violence, you know. And so so there's those things that you always have to consider, like if you are a public facing person on social media that is taking place, that is kind of you know, like taking part in something like this. But yeah, I mean, probably wrap it up on this.
Yeah, I think, well, Tim, I think you've done a really good job of detailing like boycotts.
Tim wrote this entire episode, for the record.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to draw these comparisons with, for example, the boycott that we're seeing against Bud Light, right? In terms of like, you know, they are trying to make a statement here that is part of a broader campaign. But what is that campaign? That campaign is essentially just, you know, the eradication of LGBTQIA+ people, right? So, you know, if you want to draw attention to this. Again, like we said before, you're gonna be drawn to the fact that Dylan Mulvaney is just a normal woman, right? She is just simply a normal person. Like, there is nothing extravagant or hateful or horrible or negative about what she does or anything like that, or who she is. And so the only way that you could possibly have empathy with these people who are boycotting Bud Light is if you're, an extremist, far-right reactionary. And if you're already that kind of person, you're going to know about the Bud Light stuff because it's all these people can fucking think about.
Yeah, and that's like the thing. Yeah. It's like it's not anything that that Dylan has done in particular. It's like it's who she is as a trans woman. Like it could have been any trans person doing any kind of like sponsored deal with any business or anything like that, and these people would have like found it eventually and pounced on it or whatever. And it's like kind of similar to what we're seeing now. I don't know the full situation, but one of Mr. Beast's crew came out recently as, I think, non-binary, and it's like this instant thing where it's like people just like instantly pouncing, like people that like I don't know anything about Mr. Beast or any of that kind of shit or whatever.
Friend of the show, Mr. Beast.
Yeah, Mr. Beast. No, he's actually like probably like indicative of a whole bunch of stuff that's really terrible about neoliberal capitalism. Yeah. But so like, and it's just like it could be. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be like, they're obsessed with this idea of like queerness or transness being shoved down their throats, but their definition of shoved down their throats is simply existing and being seen or whatever. So it's it's the exact same thing with Dylan, with I think Chris is the name, and I think they use like kind of all pronouns, which has also been funny seeing transphobes deliberately try and misgender someone.
Fucking gotcha.
Oh, shit, what do I do?
Fucking gotcha.
How do I do a transphobia?
Yeah. But
yeah. So I think it's in terms of like how that goes versus the Hogwarts Legacy thing, you can actually see how this is in terms of direct harm to people. You can see the direct harm that J.K. Rowling has done, and you can see how that is an active thing to go against. Exactly the same in terms of like Israel's state oppression of Palestinians, the civil rights movement back in the day in America, and all these different sort of examples of actual boycotts doing really good work as part of broader movements is completely so much better than anything that the reactionary right are trying to
parking up out front of the brewery and just flipping the bird for 2 hours.
also buying an absurd amount of Bud Light crates and running them over with like what is it, a fucking flattener machine? What do they call it? Like a road kind of steamroller fucking thing.
The other thing is that it's like so many people pushing these kind of things, like they create a product as an alternative, and it's like this really cynical thing where they're like, yeah, boycott fucking boycott the gay beer and drink the man beer that I made that you can buy directly from my website, for like twice the price. And people go like, fuck yeah, I'm gonna drink that Patriot fucking piss or whatever. And it's like, it's so cynical. It's like there's like the people that have no, like they're just the average Joe that has no idea that they're being manipulated, and they're the guy doing the fingers at the Bud Light factory or whatever. He's just like getting exploited by so many layers of people above him, like so it's all part of a bigger kind of like ecosystem of terrible people doing and saying terrible things. But yeah, just to go over, I think boycotts as a general tool for change have been pretty successful, like with the iconic ones like the bus boycotts and the anti-apartheid ones. But but they kind of hinge on getting widespread support, and that doesn't necessarily mean widespread like people in the streets, but like just kind of having the public on their side, I guess, like what we saw with the Springbok tour. Yeah, and a lot of people like, and there are like some fair criticisms about them not being the most effective way to bring about change, because like there's always I guess like more extreme things that you could go for. I would say more extreme or based. But yeah, because a lot of people will say that they address the symptoms rather than the root causes, which isn't always true, but that is like something that a lot of people say, and I think it definitely applies to things like like we were talking about how like the Sleeping Giants one with getting Nestle to pull advertising from like shitty publications or whatever, where it's like Nestle are kind of part of the bigger kind of like the bigger thing that ends up with these publications downstream anyway. So yeah, so I think like the best ones, the most effective boycotts that out of all the examples that we've listed have been the ones that have focused on not just like the kind of attacking a company for their like values or whatever like that, but looking at systemic change around, whether it's combating apartheid or colonial rule, things like that. So bigger picture thing is, I think that's something we always talk about, like with a lot of orgs and stuff like that, like kind of having a bigger picture goal for how you want to affect society, as opposed to how you want to fight this one particular battle. But yeah, so let's look at the little questions we got coming in here. So we got from Shafiq, we got what is the first boycott that the panel members became aware of or took part in? Yeah, what do you guys reckon? What was the first for you?
So it's literally like, for me, the BDS. I don't know what you were gonna say, Kira.
Oh, I was gonna say veganism.
Oh
right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Although it before veganism, it was like, I'm gonna stop consuming battery hen eggs, and I'm gonna stop. Like, it was very like vote with your dollar, liberal, like complete and utter not understanding the bigger
general
picture,
animal rights kind of thing, and then you move from that into more like specifically like veganism and
and now it's like my philosophy, my values are reflected in my behavior, and my behavior as a person that lives under capitalism is largely, unfortunately, my consumption. And so that's the way that I try to go about it. So that's like the ongoing, I suppose, boycott, although it's not truly a boycott because it's not like one particular company or whatever. I mean, I guess would you call this a boycott?
Yeah,
I feel like it's like there are a lot of groups together that are organizing boycotts along those lines. So yeah, I think like it is like, because there's like a personal boycott, like something that you are personally doing, and then something that is like, like there are plenty of organizations that are calling for like a boycott of all animal products and byproducts and stuff. Yeah, so yeah, I feel like that's that's definitely qualifies.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
And so BDS for you, Mule, you reckon that was the first thing you were aware of?
Luckily, I had well, Manchester is a very big Palestinian solidarity city in the UK, and I had a very early sort of introduction to what BDS was in comparison to like I think a few other people in I guess in my age group in Manchester, or like in my age group in the UK, and it was like I think the first thing that I ever heard of was like Jaffa oranges. I think Jaffa oranges were like made on stolen Palestinian land, occupied Palestinian territories.
Wait, is that the little lollies that are like the orange chocolate lollies?
No.
That's what Jaffa's are over here.
Oh, right. No, Jaffa orange is just like a brand of oranges.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And they would be like labeled Israeli produce. But it was always Palestinian produce that was like, made on Palestinian territory by Palestinians. And then that would be like sold in British stores as like Israeli produce. And there's a lot of this that still happens now with like fruits and vegetables from Palestinian farmers. And it's just called Israeli. It'll say like, where is this from? Israel, and it's like, no, it's not. It's from Palestine.
That's like the whole thing. Like, you know, there's like heaps of stuff where it's like, you know, like Israeli, like it'll be like Israeli hummus or something like that, and it'll be like a Palestinian recipe
that one
on Palestinian land, but like the business owner is Israeli because they've just kind of taken their shit.
Not to mention the history of hummus and who invented hummus.
Oh, I have no idea about this. I have never heard of this.
Oh, let's not get into it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing,
yeah,
right?
So, well, I mean, for me, I think that the first one that I was ever really aware of would be the one that we spoke about earlier, the Springbok Tour one, just because that's got like such a huge thing, and I guess like the kind of like the cultural identity of like, you know, like the New Zealander or whatever, like really hinges around a lot of those kind of like pivotal moments, like where, you know, like the small countries, you know, stepped up or whatever. So it's like, yeah, the Springbok Tour, the anti-apartheid one, and then also there's like there was like a long-standing anti-nuclear thing in New Zealand, where
awesome.
We refuse to let any kind of like nuclear ships or anything like that dock in New Zealand, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, just like a lot of stuff like that that I remember from growing up. So yeah, kind of aware of a lot of those things. I think that there is kind of like, it's this thing where it's like, yeah, like I was saying before, where it was like a small group of dedicated people, where it like kind of gets made into like this thing we did, whereas like the people that actually did it have also kind of been like demonized and had their, you know, like lives ruined because of their involvement in things like this, which is like really shitty. Whereas like, you know, those people should be known as heroes. But yeah, definitely like, you know, like I think that those stories should be like, those are the stories that kids should learn about in school, you know, like it shouldn't be like, I don't know, some bullshit about like yeah, in New Zealand, like there's this thing where it's like, instead of learning a lot of history around what happened here, like it's like you learn about other countries because they're like, oh well, we're such a young country. It's like, no, we're not. Like Maori have been here for fucking ages. Like,
yeah,
you know, but like there have been a lot of things that have happened in our like recent history that that a lot of people should know more about, whether it's about, you know, like the anti-nuclear stuff, like, and like the Rainbow Warrior, and you know, like that kind of stuff, whether it's about the Springbok Tour, whether it's about like our own history of like imperialism in the Pacific and like, you know, and abroad further. But yeah, so yeah, shortening that off, I think definitely the Springbok Tour was the earliest one that I remember about.
Amazing.
By the way, I could just follow up with what someone in the Twitch chat just wanted to know about hummus, and just to follow that up, hummus, because I googled this before because I was doing research on the BDS movement, and specifically Sabra hummus, and hummus is often seen as like an unofficial like national dish of Israel.
Oh, it's totally
Israel's critics like I'm looking at the Wikipedia. Israel's critics describe it as an appropriation of Lebanese, Palestinian, or Arab culture. There's like just Israel is a fake thing. Israel did not invent hummus.
It's absolutely an Arab Middle Eastern food for sure. Yeah.
That's essentially, it wasn't like a long convoluted thing. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't like misspeaking, but yeah, no, Israel is a fake entity. It's a fake genocidal experiment that keeps perpetually happening, and so it has invented nothing except for, you know, it hasn't even invented genocide. It's
for
still,
sure.
like, you know, so
appropriation all the way down.
All the way down.
So the next one we've got is from Goat Eyed, who is asking, what are some weaknesses of boycotts and how can we overcome them or compensate for them with other methods? Yeah, I think like what we're talking about it is like, it can be hard to gain momentum if you don't already have like a kind of existing kind of reputation or whatever, you know, like a lot of the time boycotts kind of like, you know, it'll be like a small group of people that will then, you know, form an organization that kind of get the word out there like from there. So it's useful if you have like existing involvement in organizations or like a history with them, then it's usually easier to kind of like get the communications out there. Or if you have like an existing kind of social media following or some way that you can get a platform, because yeah, the biggest weakness is if people don't know what you're doing, then you're just, you know, like you're just not buying hummus, you know. So yeah, it I would say that would be the biggest thing would be yeah, trying to get the word out there is like the hardest thing. But clear communications, I think, are a really important thing for stuff like this. And that is, I think, where a lot of people sometimes struggle, especially when people are starting up small campaigns by themselves on social media and stuff. Like, you know, and that's why a lot of bigger orgs do have like press secretaries and stuff, like people that are really like, you know, like that sometimes even have some degree of like proper media training, or like, you know, even like, you know, you might have a mate with a communications degree or something like that, where it's like, we need to cut to the point of what we're saying. We need to be really clear with what our goals are. We need like, you know, all that kind of stuff, because it's really hard. Like if, you know, someone says like, okay, why do you support BDS? And you have to give them like this huge speech about like all that kind of stuff. Like you really just need to be able to say like, because, you know, Israel is an apartheid regime. What they're doing is really terrible, and they can only do it because they're being enabled by a lot of, you know, a lot of companies, corporations, and, you know, like governments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
this is so important what Tim is saying. I noticed that like, and this isn't something I'm personally working on, but I've noticed this a lot when it comes to like a lot of like insular communities where we kind of like are really used to each other knowing what we're talking about. But when it comes to explaining to a normie, it feels exhausting. And then you're like, you feel like you have to explain every single detail. And all of a sudden here comes these walls of text and like no one, or like this like 2-hour video essay. And this is not the way. You need an elevator pitch. You need to be able to like say something quick and snappy, but effective. And it's not easy to come up with. Just short does not mean easy at all.
It's like, yeah, it is really hard, because it's like, okay, cool. Well, like I can give you like, you know, like I can tell you to watch this fucking Michael Parenti video about bananas and then you'll fucking understand it all. But it's like, you know, it's like people just want to just know, you know, you got to have something that you can tell someone, like really just
that they'll
like
understand.
Yeah, just like a couple sentences or something like that. Especially if you're, you know, like if you're doing some kind of public demonstration or something like that, like, you know, like what are you going to write a novel on your signs or whatever like that? You just need, yeah, something straight up. But yeah, there's a quote B-Rat has in the chat saying, I would have written a shorter letter if only I had more time, which is like, yeah, it's getting your messaging down and your comms down is really hard.
This is one thing that I feel like, at least like in our world, like the internet content creator world, that there's an absolute and total lack of, with the exception of Twitter. But then people just write these long ass threads, right? But you see like the video essayists that are now like regularly coming out with like 10-hour videos, like that's fun and all. And that's I think that I'm not trying to say that that's like not a great contribution, but it's a contribution to a particular audience only. And there seems to be a big lack of emphasis on the shorter, snappier, more digestible, like, I don't want to say normie friendly, but like something that's not just for this very, very specific group of people. It's going to watch like 10 hours.
Yeah. You're spot on. You're absolutely spot on. Yeah, there has to be more accessibility for this kind of stuff. And like, you know, you said Twitter threads, and that is specifically something that I can't handle as an ADHD person. I just like get so distracted so easily.
No,
like
I can't
it's a lot of text. You know what I mean? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
A couple of people do have had really good success with TikTok as well.
Not me. I'm not good at TikTok.
Yeah,
I think we all know this. Some of you.
No, you're just not good at making TikToks. You're probably going to be dead good at watching it.
Yeah.
Probably.
Thank you.
The other part of the question was how to compensate for them with other methods, which I mean, I guess that's really hard to answer, because it depends on what you're trying to boycott or whatever. Because, you know, that could like go from anywhere from like, you know, like some kind of like, you know, in-person you know, like protest, like a march or something, or it could be like there was So the Alibit factory. What was the name of the group that that protested them? I can't remember their name. British group. So Alibit's a factory that making like shit for Israel, like you know, like basically making weapons and weapon related things. They had a bunch of factories in England, and a small group of activists just basically just camped out outside of them with signs and things telling everyone what they did there, being like, okay, these guys are making bombs that, you know, well, I don't know if it was bombs, but you know, they're making equipment that contributes to the killing and displacement of Palestinian people. And they were just kind of like, oh fuck, we don't need this attention, and so they just packed up and left, you know. And so like that's, you know, that's a really good thing, but it only really works because the Alibit factory, they just basically didn't want people to know what they were doing there, you know. So you really kind of have to tailor your kind of tactics to what the company doesn't want, you know. Like, do they not want attention? Do they not want, you know, like some kind of like economic hardship or whatever like that, you know? Like yeah, you know, there's you really have to look at it and think hard about what's gonna affect them the most. Like, what's their weak spot? What's the little red glowy bit that you got to hit under their belly to make them, you know, to do double damage or whatever. But
the gamer reference for all you gamers out there.
Yeah.
What's their crit? Or how do you get the crit?
What's the pro strat? How do you crit?
How do you crit them?
Israel? So
yeah, the next thing that isn't,
and last, because we are extremely overtime.
We're very overtime. Yeah. We're just going to finish with this from Husker Du. For anyone who may need to hear it, what's the best response to "there is no ethical consumption under capitalism" to dismiss you when you're speaking to someone about a boycott? The person saying that may not be doing so in good faith, but for others who may be listening, I think personally, like, you know, in terms of when people say there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, it's more often than not, unfortunately, like a cop-out for people to not
misunderstand what that quote's about.
Yeah. And when we're saying there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, what we're saying is that capitalism must be abolished.
Yeah.
That's
it's like, oh well.
Oh well, I might as well just like keep buying Sabra hummus. I might as well just keep you know, buying clothes from fast fashion outlets and shit like that. You know, it's really about like look, you know, there is a nuance to this discussion. Oh my gosh, you know, put on your big brain hats. You know, we have to do some thinking about this. No one is going to sit there and tell a working class person who can't afford to shop anywhere other than, you know, somewhere that has incredibly bad ethical practices. For example, I don't know how the fuck they make the shower gel in Aldi, aka Trader Joe's, that means that it's 60p. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how they make that, but the unfortunate reality is I can't really afford to buy anything that's more ethical than that. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's like, you know, no one is sat here saying like, if you're poor, fuck you for buying things that you can afford, right?
Yeah, you got to buy the Gwyneth Paltrow cruelty-free fucking brand, right? Like,
I would love to be able to afford to shop at Lush, for example. Like, I love Lush.
I need to interject very briefly. There's a big myth under capitalism that's perpetuated by capitalism that the more money you spend, the more ethical, and that's not true.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily, demonstrably not true. If you want, I can always show you resources. We can do this in Discord or whatever.
Like,
but it's not true.
Ethical and like cruelty free and all that kind of stuff is like often like a marketing kind of thing.
That's often brands, a marketing thing, but I'm speaking specifically to what Neil is saying about like buying something cheaper means that it's less ethical than if you bought something more expensive.
Yeah, it's not always true. Yeah, it's not always true at all. And I think
it's rarely true, in fact. Because the way that's not how, I think we all know that's not how capitalism works, right?
Yeah, the emphasis I was trying to make here is that I think that sometimes people think that like it's classist to say that, like, you know, everybody needs to shop a certain way, etc., etc. And I just wanted to sort of like point out that it's like no one is trying to force people who don't have a lot of money to like spend more money than they can. You know, exactly like Kira said, it's not always the case that you know, more ethical things are more expensive. So there you go.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's like the main thing is if someone says something about, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, like it's very easy, like if someone says something like that to like to just be like, okay, cool, like you've just quoted a small part of a larger piece that I don't think you understand. And like it's actually it's actually a critique of the entire system of capitalism and why we need to abolish it, and not like not a way just to discount any attempt to do so, whatever. But I think that like for people that are intentionally trying to wind you up by saying that kind of stuff, like people that are reactionary or whatever, a lot of the time it's like they don't actually care about facts or whatever, but what they hate is like feeling embarrassed or whatever. So you can just point out that like, oh no, you don't actually understand what you're talking about. That is, if they are being shitty like that, it might just be a friend being like, whatever. But yeah, if someone is trying to like sneak in and own like that, then it's just like, well, no, you actually like you don't even understand what you're quoting. Like this is what it's about. And I think that like people will shut up faster if you can kind of like embarrass them like that than if you like bust out facts and figures and like a broad dissection of society or whatever.
You're right. The way that I'm going to piggyback on everything else, both of what you said I agree with, and I would sometimes I include what you said into like my answer to this because I get this a lot as a vegan, like a lot. But just to add on, sometimes I'll just answer with like something like so like, what do you feel about like owning slaves? They're like, oh, that's horrible. It's like, but there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. So like, can't you just have some slaves then? Like,
yeah, it's like, obviously you got to draw it somewhere.
Like, no, you can't. Like you'll see these like liberals that masquerade as socialists or whatever the hell they call themselves will denigrate people like Pete Buttigieg for working for whatever the hell he worked for. What was that horrible?
I don't know, like
one of those horrible consulting companies that like fix bread prices and some
that's right.
Yeah, the bread prices thing. Right. Yeah.
And like and like anyone who knows about that will end up using the like there's no ethical consumption of capitalism. Whenever if they say that and they're involved in electoral politics, or they were during the last election, they probably shout on Pete Buttigieg for what he did for working for that company. But so like there's like a huge disconnect in like what they claim to espouse versus what they are actually willing to do, and that's where that's coming from. That's why they're citing that. But they're clearly in agreement that being shitty as a human is being shitty. That's shitty to be shitty. And so like clearly there's somewhere, it's hard to figure out where that line exactly is in our society throughout your entire life. And again, as a vegan, I dealt with this very personally, and I've talked about this a lot on my stream. But those people that say that quote, they understand that like if we live under capitalism, if I was like decide to buy some humans to enslave them, that's not a defensible thing to do, despite me reciting the mantra, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Yeah, you just buy slaves and just repeat that to yourself.
McKinsey. Yeah, that was it.
You just repeat that mantra to yourself, and it makes it all go
there's no
away.
ethical. Yeah, you just like
just keep doing it. It's like Hail Marys. You got to do like 100 of it, and then that's fine.
Yeah. Anyways.
But yeah, thank you so much, Tim, for basically structuring this episode, basically doing this episode. He's very good. We love Comrade Tim. And really appreciate that. I think we've done a good job of not just educating people about boycotts, but also criticizing the attempt of a boycott of reactionary far right individuals. So thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Cool. Yeah. Well, how about before we go, we educate folks a little on our Patreon. And
oh my God, we haven't even
ethical consumption. By the way, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, except for this one form of consumption, and it's our Patreon.
Consume us.
Consume us.
Well, so if you jump on over to patreon.com/red_planet. So patreon.com/red_planet. You can sign up to our Patreon. We've got a bunch of different tiers. They all give you different little perks. So the first one we've got is Sprite mode. So that's about $2 American a month, or $4 New Zealand, something else if you're somewhere else.
£2.
Yeah. And so get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. Benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you are helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, and access to the Red Planet Discord. So yeah, we have a Discord server for the stream where we hang out and talk about stuff, share stuff, and even like a lot of the time stuff that we talk about there ends up coming on the show, like in the news and stuff. Also share memes, talk about games, all that kind of stuff. And so Sprite mode gets you into the Discord as well as yeah, you know, the VODs and stuff. Then what is the next step, Mule?
The next step, aka the next tier, is Goblin mode. And oh my god, everyone loves a little goblin. We all get a little Goblin mode from time to time. Goblin mode costs £9.50 a month if you're in the UK, or $10 a month if you're in the US. And what is it in New Zealand dollars, Tim?
And $19 a month.
$19 a month. So yeah, as I say, everyone loves a goblin. We all get a little goblin mode from time to time. Complete your gobology by going goblin mode with everything from Sprite mode. A pack of cool Red Planet stickers for you to stick in legal places and only in places like that, because the law is the arbiter of all morality. Access to the exclusive Red Planet Discord hangouts, and we are planning another hangout that hasn't quite been finalized yet, where we're going to watch some Star Trek. So you got that to look forward to if you're a cheeky goblin mode, you know.
Cheeky little goblin.
That's right. And you got to keep doing that voice. It's important you keep it up. You've not done it that much. You've not done it that much this episode.
I'm sorry, I've been really not very Britophobic today. I'll do better.
Not good enough. Please do better. Please be more Anglophobic. Yeah, and well, you can pay your penance to me for not being Anglophobic enough by telling us what the next mode is. Kira, what is that?
The next node, step, or tier is beast mode. For $20 a month American, or in British pounds, 19 British pounds, or in New Zealand dollars,
it's $189 a month at the moment.
No, it's not.
Mode.
No,
beast
it's
mode.
not.
Oh wait, sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. 38 a month. Yeah, no, our dollar isn't that bad. Yeah. But hold on. Let's see how low it can go. No, $38 a month for beast mode.
Okay, 38 New Zealand dollars, so $20 a month American. Okay. Holy shit! Are you actually going to go beast mode? Well, then we can offer you all the stuff from the lower tiers and pin badges. Yep, pin badges. Wear your excellent new Red Planet pin badge literally everywhere. It is completely cool and good to do. But what if I'm disgusting? What if I'm just a sick fuck? What do I do then? What do I do?
What do you do then? You join us, the real sickos, in sicko mode for 189 New Zealand dollars a month, or 100 American dollars, probably around £100 or whatever. So yeah, if you support us this much, we can only really reasonably offer you all of the stuff from the lower tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream, which sounds like this. Thank you, Sicko JBP, for being our sicko.
Thank you so much.
Helping Conrad get the gruel.
Thank you, JBP. Yeah. Thank you.
So, yeah.
All right.
Cool.
We did it.
Well,
wow.
So
what a show. That was a show.
Yeah, that was a show. Before we raid out, how about Mule? Where can people find some more of Donald John Mule?
They can thank you, Tim. They can find me, Dr. Donald Mule, over at DJ Mule. I've got a link tree, linktree.ee. Basically, that's it. / DJ MUEL for those listeners out there who can't see my name on the screen or in the Twitch chat. But yeah, essentially, it would really mean the world if you would go and check out my new video. It's called Berserk as a Queer Polyamorous Love Story. It's been about 5 months in the making, and yeah, it's one of the biggest.
Fancy one it's the fancy 4K one.
That's correct. I filmed it in 4K. Yeah.
And what are we doing tomorrow? You and me, Mule. You and me. You and me. You and me.
Tomorrow, me and my sweet, beautiful comrade Kira are going to be reacting to my video on her stream. So this is a dual. Where can we find more of moment? As long as you go check me out on YouTube, DJ MUEL, that would rock so much just for the time being. But also, you could find more Kira if you go to twitch.tv/Kira Chats. And Kira, tell us where we can find more of you in general.
Yeah, well, everything. Kira Chats everywhere. My link tree is Kira Chats. You can find a link to my link tree if you don't know how to find link tree. Just type in link tree Kira Chats in Google, but you can also just go to my Twitter, twitter.com/Kira Chats. It's the links in there. All my stuff's in there. I just want to put it out there that I am a sex worker. Also, I have a link tree.
Oh my God.
These things are just facts about me. So check out my link tree. Anyways, Tim, where can we find you?
So you can find me in many places. Here on Twitch, you can find me as Conquest of Dread. You can also find me on YouTube under that name. But on Twitter, you can find me as Dread Conquest. So same things, just around. I haven't been streaming too much outside of Red Planet lately. I would like to, though. There's a couple little games that have come out that I might jump on soon. I feel like maybe I'll do like a hangout game stream on the Discord. What we do with the little hangout streams is usually we like watch a movie or a documentary or something like that. But maybe I'll do a game one soon, or we can there's like the games built into Discord that you can play with people. So maybe some people in the hangouts we can do that. There's like heaps of them. They're all like competitive.
Does it work?
Apparently, yeah. Apparently, there's like some cool kind of Jackbox ones, and there's like some like mini golf ones and stuff. But that could be cool if people want to come and jump in on the Discord. If you are of of Goblin mode or above, and you can get into the Hangouts, then you can come and we can we'll do something. But yeah. And then obviously our beloved Soph, who is not here this week, out doing based stuff, doing the Catboy Lennon tattoo with one hand, and just whatever,
doing estrogen injections with the other.
Yeah, I couldn't even remember what else we were doing. But you can check her out. The important one for her is patreon.com/Sophie from Mars. But you can go to Linktree, so linktr.ee/Sophie from Mars for everything. But Sophie from Mars on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. You can find her in all of the usual places. Awesome, cool. So that's it. So we're going to raid into our good friend Casey Explosion, who is doing a charity marathon in support of the Peter McVerry Trust.
Yes. So if you're listening on podcasts, make sure you go and support Casey if you get a chance. I think she should still be doing this. Or maybe not. I don't know, actually.
A housing first services provider in Ireland.
Yeah. But thank you so much, everybody, for watching and listening and taking part in the chat and all that kind of stuff. Remember, synergy-based stuff based at redplanetshow.com, and we will see you next week. It's fingers time.
Also, I'm single.
Yeah. Remember that. I'm polyamorous.
Oh, wait, I got the wrong...
Don't talk to me. Don't ever talk to me.
We got
there you go.
That. Ooh.
Are we done? Okay, good.